When a man's fist connects with your face at 4:30 in the morning, you learn that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they smile at breakfast and shake hands with the sheriff. This is the story of Lena Whitmore, a woman who spent 7 years perfecting the art of disappearing while standing in plain sight. A story about the silent giant who refused to look away, in the moment when everything, reputation, power, fear itself, finally shattered like glass. Stay until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and decades-old grease that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully erase. Lena Whitmore stood at the industrial sink with her back to the door, hands submerged in dishwater that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She wasn't washing dishes, she was hiding. Outside, thunder rolled across the Arizona desert like artillery fire, the kind that made windows rattle and dogs howl. Rain hammered the tin roof of the dusty Rose Motel and Diner with enough force to drown out most sounds. But not all of them. Not the creak of floorboards in the dining room. Not the low rumble of men's voices discussing cattle prices and county politics over lukewarm eggs. And definitely not the sound of Victor's laughter. Lena's husband had a gift for laughter. Warm, rich, the kind that made strangers trust him instantly. Right now he was using it on Mayor Drummond and his cousin Dale, probably spinning some story about his latest real estate deal or the time he supposedly saved a drowning kid from the reservoir. The details changed depending on the audience, but the effect was always the same. People ate it up. They always did. Lena's left cheek throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She pressed the cold, wet rag against it again, wincing as the pressure sent fresh pain radiating down to her jaw. The split in her bottom lip had finally stopped bleeding about an hour ago, but it still tasted like copper every time she swallowed. She'd gotten good at the makeup. Foundation 3 shades too dark to cover the purple, powder to set it, concealer for the really bad spots. This morning she'd done her best work yet, layering it on in the dim light of their bathroom while Victor snored in the bedroom, sleeping off whatever he'd drunk the night before. It hadn't been enough. The bruise was too fresh, the swelling too pronounced. Even in the poor lighting of the diner's kitchen, even with her hair pulled forward to shadow her face, someone would notice. Someone always noticed eventually. They just never said anything about it. That was the deal in a town like Redemption Flats. You minded your business. You kept your mouth shut. You didn't ask questions about what happened behind closed doors, especially when those doors belonged to Victor Hale, land developer, investor, the man who'd personally funded the new elementary school and half the paved roads in the county. The kitchen door swung open behind her. Lena's shoulders tensed immediately, her hands gripping the edge of the sink hard enough to hurt. She didn't turn around. She never turned around unless she absolutely had to. Coffee's getting low out front. The voice was deep, quiet, and belonged to Caleb Rourke. Lena exhaled slowly, forcing her muscles to unclench. I'll make a fresh pot. She heard him move closer, his boots heavy on the cracked linoleum. Caleb wasn't a small man. 6'4", built like he'd been assembled from spare parts of mountains and oak trees, hands the size of dinner plates, shoulders that barely fit through standard door frames. People in town said he'd killed 3 men during the Indian Wars. Others said it was more like 10. Lena had heard at least a dozen different versions of the story since moving to Redemption Flats, each one more dramatic than the last. The only consistent detail was that Caleb Rourke had been a cavalry scout in his younger days, and that something terrible had happened out in the territories that made him quit the army and buy a failing motel in the middle of nowhere. He'd owned the Dusty Rose for nearly 8 years now. Ran it himself, mostly. Did the repairs, changed the sheets, cooked the breakfast shift when his regular cook called in sick. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much either, just watched everything with those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever front you were trying to maintain. Lena kept her face turned toward the sink. Sorry, I know the morning rush is... Turn around. It wasn't a request. Lena's stomach dropped. She considered pretending she hadn't heard him, but that would only make it worse. She dried her hands on her apron, tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, and slowly turned to face him. Caleb stood about 6 feet away, arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing his usual uniform, dark jeans, a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, scuffed boots that had probably been resoled a dozen times. His face was weathered and hard, all sharp angles and permanent scowl lines, with a scar running through his left eyebrow that made him look perpetually angry even when he wasn't. Right now, he definitely was. His eyes moved across her face with the systematic precision of a man conducting an inventory. The swollen cheek, the split lip. The way she was holding herself, weight shifted to favor her right side because her left ribs were still tender from 3 nights ago. Lena lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze even though everything in her screamed to look away. I walked into a cabinet, stupid. I know, I was half asleep, and don't. The single word hit like a slap. Caleb's expression hadn't changed, but something dangerous had entered his voice, something that made the hair on the back of Lena's neck stand up. I need to make that coffee, she said quietly. You need to sit down before you fall down. I'm fine. You're shaking. She looked down at her hands. He was right. They were trembling, fingers twitching with leftover adrenaline and fear that never quite went away anymore. Caleb moved to the battered wooden table in the corner where the kitchen staff usually ate their meals. He pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound like grinding teeth. Sit. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she had work to do, customers to serve, a husband who'd expect her home by 6:30 sharp, or there'd be hell to pay. But her legs suddenly felt like they were made of wet sand, and the thought of staying upright for another minute seemed impossible. She sat. Caleb disappeared into the walk-in cooler and came back with a clean towel wrapped around a handful of ice. He handed it to her without a word. Thank you, Lena whispered. He nodded once, then leaned against the counter with his arms crossed again, watching her. The silence stretched out between them, broken only by the rain hammering the roof and the distant sound of Victor's laughter filtering in from the dining room. Finally, Caleb spoke. How long? Lena pressed the ice against her cheek. The cold burned, but in a good way. How long has he been hitting you? The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody had ever asked her that question out loud before. Not her mother, who lived 2 states away and called once a month. Not her former friends, who'd all drifted away over the years. Not the cashier at the drugstore who'd seen her buy makeup in increasingly darker shades. Nobody. I should get back to work, Lena said. You're not going back out there looking like that. He'll expect... I don't give a damn what he expects. Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more frightening than if he'd shouted. You're staying in this kitchen until I say otherwise. Lena's chest tightened. She wanted to explain that it would only make things worse, that Victor would know someone had interfered and he'd take it out on her later, that Caleb didn't understand how these things worked, how carefully you had to manage every interaction, every expression, every word to keep the violence at a manageable level. But looking at Caleb's face, carved from granite and absolutely unyielding, she knew he wouldn't care about any of that. 7 years, she heard herself say. We've been married 7 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. Since the beginning? Not exactly. The first 6 months were different. Good, even. Or I thought they were. Lena laughed, a bitter sound that hurt her split lip. He waited until after the honeymoon, until we'd moved here, away from everyone I knew, until I'd quit my job and depended on him for everything. Then one night I disagreed with him about something small, what movie to watch, I think, and he backhanded me so hard I saw stars. The ice was starting to numb her face. She shifted it to a fresh spot. He cried afterward, she continued, said he was sorry, that it would never happen again, that his father used to hit his mother and he'd sworn he'd never become that kind of man. I believed him. I actually believed him. She shook her head. It happened again 2 weeks later, and then a week after that. And then it just became normal. Caleb hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. He's careful, Lena added. Usually. Hits where people can't see, knows exactly how hard to push before something breaks. Last night was different, though. He'd been drinking with some investors and the deal fell through, and he came home angry. I said the wrong thing. I can't even remember what it was now. The kitchen door swung open again. Both of them turned. Victor Hale stood in the doorway, smiling that megawatt smile that had probably sold 1,000 acres of land over the years. He was handsome in an almost aggressive way. Sharp jaw, perfect teeth, expensive haircut, tailored shirt that probably cost more than Lena made in a month. At 42, he looked like he could have walked off a movie poster for successful businessman who has his life together. "There you are, sweetheart," he said warmly. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Lena stood up so fast the chair almost tipped over. "I was just making coffee." "I know." Victor's eyes flicked to Caleb, and his smile widened. "Morning, Rourke. Hell of a storm, isn't it?" Caleb didn't respond. He just stared at Victor with an expression that could have frozen fire. Victor's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and slipped an arm around Lena's waist, pulling her close. To anyone watching, it would have looked affectionate, protective even. But his fingers dug into her ribs, right where the bruises were still healing, with enough force to make her gasp. "You feeling all right, honey?" Victor asked, his voice dripping with concern. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," Lena managed. "Good. Because Mayor Drummond wants to say hello. You know how he is, loves chatting with the prettiest woman in the room." Victor's fingers dug in harder. "Don't want to keep him waiting." Lena caught Caleb's eye for just a second. She tried to communicate something. "Please don't make this worse. Please just let me handle this, please." But she wasn't sure if he understood. Caleb's expression hadn't changed. He was still staring at Victor like he was mentally calculating the exact amount of force required to put a man through a wall. Victor noticed. His smile sharpened. "Something wrong, Rourke?" "Your wife was about to fall over. Told her to sit down before she hurt herself." "Is that so?" Victor's tone was pleasant, but his grip on Lena tightened. "Well, that's mighty considerate of you, but I think I can take care of my own wife." "Can you?" The 2 words hit like a hammer. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop about 20 degrees. Victor's smile finally slipped just for a second. Then it was back, bright and empty. "Excuse me?" Caleb pushed off from the counter and took a step forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "I said, can you take care of your wife? Because from where I'm standing, looks like somebody's been taking care of her a little too roughly." Lena's heart stopped. This was bad. This was so much worse than bad. Victor's laugh was sharp, surprised. "I'm sorry, are you implying something?" "I'm not implying anything. Because it sounds like you're making some pretty serious accusations." "Not accusations, observations." Victor's arm dropped from Lena's waist. He turned to face Caleb fully, and Lena watched his whole demeanor shift. The charming businessman evaporated, replaced by something colder, harder. "Let me tell you something, Rourke." Victor's voice was quiet now, all pretense of friendliness gone. "I don't know what kind of hero fantasy you've got playing in your head, but you need to back off. Lena's my wife. What happens in our house is none of your goddamn business." "Maybe it should be. Maybe you should mind your own business before you find yourself dealing with problems you can't handle." Caleb smiled for the first time since the conversation started. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice, from one man to another." Victor straightened his collar, his composure sliding back into place like armor. "I've got a lot of friends in this town, Rourke, on the city council, in the sheriff's department, people who depend on my goodwill and my money, people who wouldn't take kindly to some washed-up cavalry scout spreading lies about me. Truth isn't a lie just because you don't like it. And proof isn't proof just because you want it to be." Victor's smile was back, cold and sharp as a knife blade. "You see any proof here, Rourke? Any evidence of anything other than a clumsy woman who walked into a cabinet?" Lena wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. She wanted to rewind the last 5 minutes and keep her mouth shut. She wanted to grab Caleb's arm and beg him to stop pushing because Victor would make her pay for this later, and it would be so much worse than usual. But she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there frozen while 2 men stared at each other like wolves deciding whether to fight or retreat. Finally, Caleb spoke. "Get out of my kitchen." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? This is my property, my kitchen, and I'm telling you to leave. I'm a paying customer. Not anymore. Get out." For a moment, Lena thought Victor might actually swing at Caleb. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened, and that familiar rage started building behind his eyes, the same look he got right before things turned violent. But they were in public. There were witnesses in the dining room, and Victor Hale was nothing if not careful about his image. He took a breath, let it out slowly, and his expression smoothed back into practiced neutrality. This conversation isn't over, Rourke. Yeah, it is. Victor turned to Lena. For just a second, with his back to Caleb, his mask slipped completely. The look he gave her was pure venom, filled with promises of consequences and pain. Then he smiled, bent down, and kissed her cheek, right where the bruise was worst. "I'll see you at home, sweetheart," he said softly. "We'll talk then." Then he was gone, boots clicking across the kitchen floor, the door swinging shut behind him. Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the table, breathing hard, her whole body shaking like she'd just run a marathon. Caleb was beside her instantly. "Sit down." "You don't understand what you just did," Lena whispered. "You don't. He's going to. I have to go home tonight, and he's going to. No." "No?" Lena looked up at him, and to her horror, felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes. "You can't just say no. I don't have a choice. I have to go home. If I don't show up, he'll come looking for me, and it'll be 10 times worse." "Then you don't go home." "Where am I supposed to go? I don't have money. I don't have family here. I don't have anywhere. Room 12. Lena stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "Room 12. End unit, far from the road. Nobody uses it except for storage." Caleb pulled a key from his pocket and set it on the table between them. "Door locks from the inside. Solid oak, reinforced frame. I keep a phone in there in case of emergencies." Lena stared at the key like it might explode. "You're offering me a room?" "I'm offering you somewhere safe." "For how long?" "As long as you need." "I can't pay you." "Don't want your money." "Caleb, listen to me." He crouched down so they were at eye level. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just gray. They were the color of storm clouds, or gunmetal, or something ancient and unbreakable. "I've seen men like your husband before. Hell, I've served with men like your husband. They're good at talking, good at smiling, good at making everyone think there's something they're not. But underneath, they're cowards. Every single one of them." "You don't know him," Lena said weakly. "I know enough. And I know this. You don't have to go home tonight. You don't have to go home tomorrow. You don't ever have to go home again if you don't want to. He'll come after me. Let him try." The words were simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in their certainty. Lena looked at Caleb's face and realized he meant it. If Victor showed up looking for her, Caleb would physically stop him. And knowing Victor, knowing how his pride worked, how his need for control infected every interaction. "Someone will get hurt," Lena said. "Probably. It might be you." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Might be." "That doesn't scare you?" "I've been scared before." "This isn't it." He nodded toward the key. "Take it. You don't have to use it tonight, or tomorrow, or ever, but you'll know it's there. That's worth something, isn't it?" Lena reached out slowly, her fingers trembling, and picked up the key. It was heavy, solid, real. The metal was warm from being in Caleb's pocket. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do you care?" Caleb stood up, his knees cracking slightly. For a long moment he didn't answer, just stared out the small kitchen window at the rain hammering down on the desert. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was talking to someone who wasn't in the room. "Long time ago, I knew a woman. She was married to a captain in my unit. Good man on the battlefield, hell in his own tent." Caleb's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "We all knew what was happening. Heard her crying sometimes at night. Saw the way she flinched when he touched her, but we didn't do anything. Told ourselves it wasn't our business. That married folks had to work their own problems out." He was quiet for a moment. "One morning we found her in the river. Said she slipped, hit her head on a rock. Captain cried at her funeral. Everyone felt real sorry for him." Caleb turned to look at Lena, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Guilt, raw and old and permanent. "I knew he'd killed her. Everybody knew. But we didn't do a damn thing about it because he was one of ours, and she was just collateral damage." Lena's throat tightened. "I told myself if I ever got another chance," Caleb continued, "if I ever saw it happening again and could actually do something about it, I would. No matter what it cost." He nodded toward the key in her hand. "So that's why. Not because I'm a good person. Because I'm trying real hard not to be the same coward I was 20 years ago." Outside, the rain was starting to let up. The thunder had moved on, rolling east toward the mountains. In the dining room, she could hear the clatter of dishes, The low murmur of conversation, the sound of normal life continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. For the first time in 7 years, someone had seen her, really seen her. Not the makeup or the excuses or the carefully maintained fiction of a happy marriage. They'd seen the truth, and instead of looking away, they'd offered her a way out. It was terrifying. It was also the first genuine spark of hope she'd felt in longer than she could remember. Lena closed her fist around the key. "Thank you." Caleb nodded once, then turned back to the stove. "Better make that coffee before the morning crowd gets restless." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she tucked the key into her apron pocket, pressed the melting ice against her face one more time, and got to work. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Lena moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups, delivering plates of eggs and toast, smiling automatically at the customers who bothered to make eye contact. Most didn't. They never did. Victor had left immediately after his confrontation with Caleb, but not before making sure everyone saw him kiss Lena goodbye at the door. Playing the devoted husband, maintaining the image. Mayor Drummond and his cousin stayed for another hour, talking cattle futures and complaining about property taxes. Neither of them mentioned Lena's face, though Drummond did ask if she was feeling all right when she brought his check. "Just tired," she'd said. He'd nodded sympathetically and left her a $2 tip. By noon, the rain had stopped completely. The desert was steaming, puddles evaporating in the sudden heat. Lena finished wiping down the counter and hung up her apron in the kitchen. Caleb was there, doing inventory on the dry goods. He glanced up when she entered. "You headed out?" Lena nodded. Her stomach was already starting to knot with dread. She had 4 hours before Victor expected her home. 4 hours to figure out what she was going to say, how she was going to apologize for Caleb's interference, what story she could spin to minimize the damage. "Still got that key?" Caleb asked. Lena's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket. "Yeah. Good. Don't forget it's there." She wanted to tell him that having the key wouldn't change anything, that she couldn't just run away and hide forever. That Victor would find her eventually, and when he did, it would be worse than any beating she'd endured so far. But looking at Caleb's face, hard and certain and unmovable, she kept her mouth shut. "See you tomorrow," she said instead. "See you tomorrow." The drive home took 15 minutes. Lena drove slowly, taking the long way, putting off the inevitable. Their house was on the edge of town, a sprawling ranch-style place with a 3-car garage and a lawn that Victor paid someone to maintain. It was beautiful, impressive. The kind of house that said, "Successful man with a perfect life." Lena hated every inch of it. She pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to prepare herself. The house was quiet. Victor's car was gone, which meant he was still in town, probably at his office, or meeting with investors, or drinking with his buddies at the country club. Small mercies. Lena let herself in through the front door. The house smelled like the expensive candles Victor insisted they keep burning at all times. Pine and cedar, supposedly. To her, it just smelled like trying too hard. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her purse on the hall table, and headed for the bedroom. Maybe she could get a few hours of sleep before he came home. Maybe if she was asleep when he arrived, he'd leave her alone. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes. She was halfway down the hallway when she heard the creak of floorboards behind her. Lena froze. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" Victor's voice was calm, conversational. "That's not very polite, sweetheart." She turned slowly. He was standing in the doorway to his office, arms crossed, that familiar cold smile on his face. He must have parked in the garage. She hadn't thought to check. Stupid. So stupid. "I didn't know you were home," Lena said carefully. "Obviously." Victor moved toward her with the easy confidence of a man who knew he held all the power. "We need to talk about this morning." "Nothing happened this morning." "Don't lie to me." His smile widened. "I hate when you lie to me." Lena's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I'm not... That cook of yours, Rourke, he seems to have some very interesting ideas about our marriage." "He doesn't know anything." "No?" "Because it sounded to me like someone's been telling stories." Victor stopped about 3 feet away, close enough to grab her, but far enough to maintain the illusion of civility. "Have you been telling stories, Lena?" "No." Then how does he know about your bruises? He saw them this morning. I couldn't cover them well enough. And what did you tell him when he asked? Nothing. I said I walked into a cabinet. But he didn't believe you. I can't control what he believes. Victor's hand shot out faster than she could react, grabbing her wrist and twisting it hard enough to make her gasp. No, but you can control what you say. And from where I was standing, it looked like you were having a real cozy conversation with him in that kitchen. He was asking if I was okay, and you should have said yes and walked away. Victor's grip tightened. Instead, you sat there, talked to him, let him touch you. He gave me ice for my face. He gave you ideas. Victor pulled her closer, his face inches from hers. Ideas that you can leave, that you can run, that someone will protect you from me. His voice dropped to a whisper. But that's not how this works, sweetheart. You're mine. You married me, made vows. And those vows don't break just because some washed-up army reject decides to play hero. Lena knew better than to argue, knew better than to pull away. But the key in her pocket seemed to burn against her leg, reminding her that she had options, that she didn't have to stand here and take this. The thought must have shown on her face because Victor's expression darkened. "What's that look?" he asked softly. "Nothing. Don't lie." "I'm not—" He hit her. Open palm right across the face, hard enough to snap her head to the side. The world tilted, spots dancing in her vision. "I'll ask you one more time," Victor said calmly. "What was that look?" Lena touched her mouth. Her lip had split open again, blood on her fingertips. "Nothing," she repeated. Victor studied her for a long moment, then released her wrist and stepped back. "You're going to quit that job." "What?" "You heard me. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call Rourke and tell him you're not coming back. Tell him you're focusing on the house, on being a better wife, whatever bullshit excuse you want. But you're done working at that diner." "Victor, please. This isn't a discussion, Lena. It's an order." He straightened his collar, back to being the polished businessman. "I've put up with you working there because it kept you busy, kept you out of trouble. But clearly that's not working anymore. So we're done with it." "That's the only money I have," Lena said desperately. "The only thing that's mine." "You don't need money. You have me." Victor smiled. "Everything you need, I provide. That's how marriage works." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. And you will." He checked his watch. "I have a meeting at 3. When I get home tonight, I expect this house to be spotless, dinner on the table, and you in a better mood. Think you can manage that?" Lena didn't answer. Couldn't. Victor waited a beat, then shrugged. "We'll see." He walked past her, grabbed his jacket from the closet, and headed for the door. Just before he left, he turned back. "Oh, and Lena, if Rourke asks why you're quitting, you tell him it's because you want to spend more time at home. Not because I told you to, not because of anything that happened this morning, just a personal choice. Understand?" She nodded numbly. "Good girl." He blew her a kiss. "See you tonight, sweetheart." The door closed, the lock clicked, and Lena was alone. She stood in the hallway for a long time, blood dripping from her lip onto the expensive hardwood floors that Victor had insisted they install last year. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Slowly, like her body was moving through water, Lena walked to the bathroom. She cleaned her lip, washed her face, reapplied makeup over the new bruises. Routine. Automatic. Then she went to the bedroom, pulled out her suitcase from the back of the closet, and stared at it. She could pack. Right now. Throw in some clothes, grab whatever cash Victor kept in his desk, drive to the motel and take Caleb up on his offer. Disappear. Start over. And then what? Victor would come after her. He'd use his connections, his money, his reputation. He'd paint her as unstable, ungrateful, crazy. He'd freeze their bank accounts, file charges for theft if she took anything he considered his. Make her life hell in ways she couldn't even imagine yet. He always won. That was the thing people didn't understand about men like Victor. They always won because they were willing to burn everything down rather than lose. Lena put the suitcase back in the closet, but she kept the key in her pocket. 3 weeks passed before Lena actually used the key. She kept going to work despite Victor's order to quit. Every morning she'd tell him she was running errands or visiting the library, then drive straight to the dusty rows. It was stupid, reckless. But it was also the only act of defiance she had left, and some stubborn part of her refused to give it up. Victor knew, of course. He always knew. But for reasons Lena couldn't quite figure out, he didn't push it. Maybe he was waiting for her to break on her own. Maybe he liked the game of watching her try to maintain this small rebellion, or maybe he was just planning something worse. Either way, the tension in their house had become suffocating. Victor watched her constantly now, tracking her movements with the precision of a predator. He'd started coming home at random times, lunch breaks, mid-afternoon, once at 10 in the morning, just to see if she was there, testing her, catching her in lies she hadn't even told yet. The bruises had faded from her face, but new ones appeared in places easier to hide. Her ribs, her arms, the back of her thighs. Victor had always been careful about placement, but now he was meticulous, almost clinical. It was during those 3 weeks that Lena started noticing things she'd been too scared to see before. The way Victor's smile never quite reached his eyes when he talked to certain people. The way he'd grip her elbow just a little too hard when introducing her at social functions, a silent warning to play her part perfectly. The way conversations would stop abruptly when she entered a room, like people had been discussing something they didn't want her to hear. And the way certain women in town wouldn't meet her gaze at all. There was Margaret Chen, who ran the dry cleaners on 3rd Street. Lena had gone in to pick up Victor's suits one afternoon and caught Margaret staring at her with an expression that was equal parts pity and something else. Recognition, maybe. When Lena had smiled and said hello, Margaret had flinched like she'd been slapped, then busied herself with paperwork until Lena left. There was Diana Casper, a realtor who'd worked with Victor on several property deals. Lena had seen her at the grocery store, and when Diana noticed her, she'd literally abandoned her shopping cart and walked out, just left it there in the middle of the cereal aisle and disappeared. And there was Emma Hartley, a woman about Lena's age who waitressed at the steakhouse downtown. They'd crossed paths at the post office, and when Emma saw Lena, her face had gone absolutely white. She dropped the package she was holding, mumbled something incoherent, and practically ran out the door. Lena had tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that she was imagining patterns where none existed. But late at night, lying next to Victor while he slept, she'd find herself thinking about those women, wondering what they knew, what they'd seen, what they'd survived. It was Caleb who finally connected the dots. He'd been quiet since their confrontation in the kitchen, giving Lena space but watching her with those storm cloud eyes every time she came to work. He never asked about the new bruises, never pushed, just made sure she had ice when she needed it, and stood a little closer when Victor showed up to walk her to her car. But on a Tuesday morning in late July, with the desert heat already pushing past 90 degrees by 8 a.m., Caleb set a cup of coffee in front of her during her break and said, "I need to show you something." Lena looked up from the toast she'd been picking at. "What?" "In my office. Won't take long." She followed him through the kitchen and down a narrow hallway to a cramped room that served as both office and storage closet. There was a desk buried under paperwork, a filing cabinet that looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard, and a corkboard covered in receipts and supply orders. Caleb closed the door behind them and pulled a folder from the bottom desk drawer. He hesitated before handing it to her. "Before you look at this," he said quietly, "I need you to know I wasn't trying to dig into your business. This just fell into my lap, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it." Lena took the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, some of them yellowed with age. The first one was from the Redemption Flats Gazette, dated 8 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman dies in tragic accident." She scanned the article. Sarah Patterson, age 29, had apparently fallen down the stairs in her home and broken her neck. She'd been married to a prominent local businessman. The funeral was well attended. Donations could be made to the women's shelter in her memory. "I don't understand," Lena said. "Keep reading." The next clipping was from 6 years ago. "Beloved teacher lost in hiking accident." Jennifer Yates, 31, had gone hiking alone in the canyon and never came back. They'd found her body 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine. Her husband was devastated. The third article was from 4 years ago. Community mourns young mother. Rachel Simmons, 27, had died in a car accident on Route 17. Lost control of her vehicle in the rain, went off the road. Her husband and 2 young children survived her. Lena's hands were shaking. Caleb, what is this? Look at the husbands' names. She did. Sarah Patterson had been married to Victor Hale. Jennifer Yates had been married to Victor Hale. Rachel Simmons had been married to... That's not possible, Lena whispered. Victor's only been married once, to me. No. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. He's been married 4 times. You're number 4. The folder slipped from Lena's fingers, papers scattering across the desk. That's... He would have told me. There are records. Marriage certificates. I would have known. He used different names. Not completely different. Variations on his real name, slight changes to his birthday, that kind of thing. Enough to avoid automatic flags in the system, but not enough to technically qualify as identity fraud if anyone ever questioned it. Caleb picked up one of the clippings. I only found this because I was doing some research on property records for my own business, and I saw Victor's name attached to 3 different house sales after the deaths of the previous owners. That seemed strange, so I started digging. Lena couldn't breathe. The office walls felt like they were closing in. You're saying he killed them? I'm saying 3 women married to Victor Hale died in accidents over the span of 4 years. And every time, Victor inherited everything they owned. Houses, life insurance, bank accounts. Then he'd sell the property, move to a new town, and start over. But Sarah Patterson died 8 years ago. He didn't move after that. No, because that's when he figured out he didn't need to. Redemption Flats is small enough that people don't ask too many questions, but big enough that new people come through regularly. And Victor's gotten better at covering his tracks, smarter about it. Lena sat down hard in the chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Her mind was racing, trying to process what Caleb was telling her. 3 dead wives. 3 women who'd probably stood exactly where she was standing now, married to the same charming man who'd slowly revealed himself to be a monster. Jennifer Yates, she heard herself say. Hiking accident. Yeah. Victor proposed to me at the canyon, said it was his favorite place, that it held special meaning for him. Caleb's expression darkened. Jesus. Lena pressed her hands to her face. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run out of this office and keep running until she hit a state line. Instead, she just sat there, breathing in short gasps, feeling the full weight of her situation settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. Does anyone else know about this? She finally asked. I talked to Sheriff Dawes. And? He told me to mind my own business, said accidents happen, and I was seeing conspiracies where there weren't any. Dawes goes fishing with Victor every Sunday. I know. And Mayor Drummond? Plays poker with him twice a month. Lena laughed, a brittle sound that hurt her throat. So basically the entire power structure of this town is either friends with my husband or on his payroll. Not the entire structure, Caleb said. Just enough of it to make things difficult. Difficult. Lena looked at the scattered newspaper clippings, at the faces of 3 women who'd trusted the wrong man. They're all younger than me. Sarah was 29, Jennifer was 31, Rachel was 27. What's your point? I'm 34, older than any of them lived to be. She met Caleb's eyes. You think that's a coincidence? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Lena stood up slowly, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. I need to get back to work. Lena, I can't think about this right now. If I think about it, I'll fall apart, and I can't afford to fall apart. She headed for the door, then stopped. Does the offer still stand? Room 12? Always. Good. She touched the key in her pocket, the same way she'd been touching it obsessively for 3 weeks. I think I might need it soon. That night, Victor came home drunk, not tipsy, not buzzed. Fully, staggeringly drunk in a way Lena hadn't seen since their 2nd year of marriage. He could barely get his key in the lock, and when he finally stumbled through the door, he nearly tripped over his own feet. Lena had been washing dishes. She dried her hands and went to help him, muscle memory overriding common sense. Hey, sweetheart, Victor's words slurred together. Miss me? How much did you have to drink? Not enough. He grabbed onto her shoulder for balance, his weight making her stagger. Fucking investors. Fucking Patterson deal falling through. Fucking... He stopped, squinting at her face like he was trying to bring her into focus. You look different. I don't... No, no, you do. Something's different. His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, fingers rough against her cheek. You hiding something from me? Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. The folder was in her purse. She'd brought it home without thinking, and now it was sitting on the hall table where Victor could easily find it. I'm not hiding anything, she said carefully. Liar. Victor's grip on her face tightened. You've always been a terrible liar. It's one of the things I hate about you. Victor, you're drunk. Let's get you to bed. Don't tell me what to do. But he let her guide him toward the bedroom, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. You think you're so smart, so careful, but I know everything. Everything you do, everyone you talk to, every little thought in that pretty head. They made it to the bedroom. Lena tried to lower him onto the bed, but he grabbed her wrist and yanked her down with him. She landed hard, the air whooshing out of her lungs. Victor, Sarah used to look at me the way you're looking at me now. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, like I was something she needed to escape from. Know what happened to Sarah? Lena went very still. She fell. Victor's laugh was wet, ugly. Down the stairs, broke her pretty little neck. Terrible accident. I know. Do you? He pulled her closer, his breath hot and sour against her face. Do you really know? Because Jennifer knew. She figured it out, started asking questions, so I took her hiking. His smile was terrible. She fell too. Lena's mouth had gone completely dry. Victor, you're not making sense. Rachel was smarter. She tried to run, got in her car during a rainstorm, thought she could just drive away from me. His hand moved to her throat, not squeezing but resting there. A threat. But I'd cut her brake lines that morning. She made it about 10 miles before... He made a crashing sound, complete with hand gestures. Stop, Lena whispered. You want to know the funny part? Everyone believed me. Every single time. Poor Victor, losing another wife to tragedy. Must be cursed. People actually felt sorry for me. He laughed again. The insurance money was nice, too. Really nice. Lena was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Let me go. Why? So you can run to your friend Rourke? Tell him all about mean old Victor? His hand tightened slightly on her throat. You think he can protect you? You think anyone can? I'm not... You are. Victor's face was inches from hers now. You're thinking about it. I can see it in your eyes. You want to leave me, just like they did. I don't... Don't lie. He shoved her away hard enough that she rolled off the bed and hit the floor. I've been patient with you. So fucking patient. Gave you space. Let you keep that stupid job. Didn't even kill you when you embarrassed me in front of that cook. Lena scrambled backward until her spine hit the dresser. Victor sat up, swaying slightly, pointing at her with unsteady fingers. But my patience has limits, he said, and you're reaching them. Then he fell backward onto the bed and passed out. Lena sat on the floor for a long time, listening to Victor snore, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. He'd confessed. Just confessed to 3 murders like he was discussing the weather. And he was so drunk he probably wouldn't even remember it tomorrow. But she would. She waited until she was absolutely certain he was unconscious, then slowly got to her feet. Her whole body ached. Her throat felt bruised where he'd touched it. Moving as quietly as possible, Lena grabbed her purse from the hall table, checked to make sure the folder was still inside, and walked out the front door. She didn't pack. Didn't take anything except her purse and the clothes on her back. She got in her car, started the engine, and drove to the Dusty Rose Motel. Room 12 was exactly where Caleb had said it would be. Last unit on the end, far from the road, half hidden by an old cottonwood tree. The paint was peeling, and the numbers on the door were faded almost to illegibility. But when Lena turned the key, the lock clicked open smoothly. Inside the room was basic but clean. Double bed with a handmade quilt. Small bathroom with a shower that had probably been installed sometime in the 70s. A phone on the nightstand, just like Caleb had promised. And on the dresser, someone had left a note. Door locks from inside, extra blankets and closet. Kitchen is always open if you get hungry. You're safe here. C. Lena read the note 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in her pocket next to the key. She locked the door, checked it twice, then sat down on the bed. Only then did she let herself cry. She cried for Sarah and Jennifer and Rachel, for the years she'd lost believing Victor's lies, for the person she used to be before fear became her constant companion. She cried until her ribs hurt and her eyes burned and she didn't have any tears left. Then she lay down, still fully dressed, and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to knocking. For a confused moment, Lena thought she was home, and Victor was at the bedroom door, and panic seized her chest. Then she remembered where she was. The knocking came again, gentle and patient. "Lena, it's Caleb. Just checking if you need anything." She looked at the clock, 7:30 a.m. She'd slept for almost 10 hours. Lena opened the door. Caleb stood there holding a paper bag and a cup of coffee, looking exactly like someone who hadn't slept at all. "Brought you breakfast," he said. "Wasn't sure if you'd eaten." "I haven't." She took the bag. Inside was a still warm biscuit with eggs and bacon. "Thank you. You doing okay?" Lena almost laughed. Was she okay? Her husband had confessed to murdering 3 women and then passed out drunk. She'd fled her own house in the middle of the night. Nothing about this situation was okay. "I heard him last night," she said instead. "Victor. He was drunk, and he told me about the others. Sarah, Jennifer, Rachel. He told me he killed them." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something dangerous entered his eyes. "He say it outright?" "Sarah fell down the stairs. Jennifer fell while hiking. Rachel's brakes were cut." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. He laughed about it, like it was funny, like they were just problems he'd solved. "You think he'll remember telling you?" "I don't know, maybe not. But I remember." "That's what matters." Caleb glanced over his shoulder at the parking lot, then back at her. "His car showed up about an hour ago. He's been circling town looking for you." Lena's stomach dropped. "Did he come here?" "Not yet, but he will eventually. This is probably the first place he'll check once he thinks about it." "Then I need to leave. Go somewhere else." "Or," Caleb said slowly, "you could stay. Fight back." "Fight back how? You said yourself the sheriff won't listen. The mayor won't listen. Victor has this whole town bought and paid for. Not the whole town, just the top. But there are people below that who might care if they knew the truth." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "I made some calls this morning. Talked to a friend who works for the county prosecutor's office in Tucson. She says if you're willing to testify, if you can provide evidence of abuse and credible allegations about the previous wives, she might be able to open an investigation. Might. It's better than nothing." Lena looked down at the coffee in her hands. It was still hot, steam rising in the cool morning air. "Victor will destroy me. He has money, connections, lawyers. What do I have? The truth. The truth doesn't mean anything when nobody wants to hear it. Maybe. But what's your alternative? Run and hide for the rest of your life? Look over your shoulder waiting for him to find you?" Caleb's voice was quiet but intense. "Or you could stand up. Tell your story. Make people listen. And if they don't? Then at least you tried. At least you didn't let him win without a fight." Lena thought about Sarah Patterson, who'd fallen down the stairs. Jennifer Yates, who'd fallen off a cliff. Rachel Simmons, whose brakes had been cut. 3 women who'd tried to survive and failed. She thought about the key in her pocket, the note on the dresser, the fact that for the first time in 7 years, someone was offering her a chance to fight back instead of just survive. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "First, we document everything. Every bruise, every injury, every incident you can remember. Get it all written down and photographed." Caleb straightened up. "Then we find the other women." "What other women?" "The ones like Margaret Chen and Diana Casper and Emma Hartley. The ones who run when they see you. The ones who know something." He met her eyes. If Victor's been doing this for 8 years in the same town, there are going to be witnesses. People who saw things they didn't want to see. Maybe even other victims who got away. "They won't talk to me." "They might. If they know someone's finally willing to stand up to him." A car drove past on the main road, and Lena instinctively stepped back into the room, out of sight. The fear was so ingrained she didn't even think about it anymore. "He's going to hurt me," she said quietly, "when he finds out I'm doing this. He's going to make me pay for it in ways I can't even imagine." "Probably. That doesn't scare you?" Caleb's smile was grim. "I'm more scared of what happens if you don't fight back. If you just disappear one day and nobody asks why. If Victor gets to bury a fourth wife and collect another insurance check. He shook his head. That scares me a hell of a lot more than whatever he might try. Lena looked past him at the desert stretching out beyond the motel. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, Victor was looking for her, planning his next move. Probably already rehearsing whatever story he'd tell when people asked where his wife had gone. She could run. Take what little money she had, get in her car, and just drive until she hit a state where Victor's connections didn't reach. Start over with a new name, a new life. It would be easier, safer. But Sarah and Jennifer and Rachel hadn't had the option to run. They died trying. Okay, Lena heard herself say. Tell me what to do. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena learned that fighting back was infinitely harder than she'd imagined. First came the documentation. Caleb took photographs of every visible bruise, every mark Victor had left on her body over the years. Then they sat in room 12 for hours while Lena wrote down everything she could remember, dates, incidents, specific words Victor had said. It was brutal work. Every memory felt like reopening a wound. Then Caleb contacted his friend in Tucson, a prosecutor named Christine Valdez who specialized in domestic violence cases. She drove down to meet with Lena personally, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened without interrupting and took notes in precise handwriting. "This is good," Christine had said when Lena finished her statement. "It's detailed, specific, consistent, but it's also just your word against his. We need more." "Like what?" "Medical records showing a pattern of injuries. Witnesses who saw him hurt you. Testimony from other victims." Christine had tapped her pen against her notepad. "And we need to prove he was married to those other women. That's going to require digging through county records in multiple jurisdictions." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months." Lena had felt something inside her deflate. "I don't have months." "Then we'll work fast." While Christine worked on the legal angle, Caleb and Lena focused on finding witnesses. Margaret Chen was first. They caught her at the dry cleaners after closing time. Margaret had been locking up when Lena approached, and the woman's face had immediately gone pale. "Please," Lena said quickly. "I just need 5 minutes." "I can't. I don't—" Margaret fumbled with her keys, dropped them. "I know Victor hurt you." The words hung in the air between them. Margaret's hand stilled. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How did you—" "Because he hurt me too, and I'm trying to stop him from hurting anyone else." Lena kept her voice gentle. "Please, just talk to me." They ended up in Margaret's car with the doors locked and the windows up despite the heat. And slowly, haltingly, Margaret told her story. It had been 5 years ago. Victor had hired Margaret to clean his office building twice a week. At first he'd been friendly, charming, always complimenting her work. Then the compliments became more personal. Then he'd started finding excuses to be alone with her. "He cornered me in the supply closet one night," Margaret said, staring straight ahead at the darkened street. "Put his hand on my throat and told me how easy it would be to make me disappear. Said nobody would even notice if I was gone, just another immigrant who moved on." "Did he—" "He didn't rape me, if that's what you're asking, but he touched me. Made it clear he could do whatever he wanted and nobody would believe me over him." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. "I quit the next day. Didn't even ask for my final paycheck. Just ran." "Why didn't you report it?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "To who? Sheriff Dawes, who has dinner at Victor's house every month? Mayor Drummond, who's known Victor since they were kids? I'm a 40-year-old woman who barely speaks English working a cleaning job. Victor Hale is a pillar of the community. Who do you think they'd believe?" Lena didn't have an answer for that. But Margaret agreed to talk to Christine Valdez, and she gave them 2 more names, women Victor had harassed or assaulted over the years who might be willing to come forward. Diana Casper was harder to track down. The realtor had moved to Phoenix 2 years ago, but Caleb managed to get her phone number through a mutual contact. When Lena called, Diana had hung up immediately. She called back 3 times before Diana finally answered. "Stop calling me," Diana said. "I know what he did to you." Silence on the other end of the line. "I'm Victor's wife," Lena continued, "and I'm building a case against him. But I need witnesses. I need people who'll stand up and say he's not who everyone thinks he is. He'll ruin you. He's already ruined me. Now I'm just returning the favor." Diana laughed. a sharp sound like breaking glass. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then tell me." Another long silence. Then, "I was handling a property sale for him. Big commercial deal, lots of money involved. Victor wanted me to falsify some documents, make it look like the land was worth more than it actually was so he could get a bigger loan. I refused." Diana's voice shook slightly. "2 days later, someone broke into my house, tore the place apart but didn't steal anything. Just left a note that said, 'Think about your choice.'" "Did you report it?" "Of course I did. Sheriff Dawes came out, looked around, said it was probably just kids. Told me to get better locks." Diana's laugh was hollow. "I moved to Phoenix a week later, but she agreed to provide a written statement, and she gave them Emma Hartley's address. Emma was the hardest conversation of all. She lived in a trailer park on the outskirts of town, working double shifts at the steakhouse to support her 6-year-old daughter. When Lena and Caleb showed up at her door, Emma had opened it with a kitchen knife in her hand. "Get the hell away from me," she said. "Emma, please. I said get away." Her daughter was visible behind her, peeking out from behind the couch. "I don't want any trouble." "We're not here to cause trouble," Caleb said calmly. "We're here because we think you might be able to help stop Victor Hale from hurting anyone else." Emma's face crumpled. "I can't. I have a kid. If Victor finds out I talked to you—" "He's already found 3 wives dead," Lena interrupted. "How long before he finds a 4th? Or a 5th? How long before your daughter grows up and meets someone just like him?" The knife lowered slightly. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." They talked for 3 hours. Emma's story was the worst one yet. Victor had gotten her pregnant 6 years ago, promised to leave his wife at the time, then tried to force her to get an abortion when she refused. When Emma threatened to tell people the baby was his, Victor had beaten her so badly she'd miscarried. "Except I didn't," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I lied, told him the baby was gone, moved towns, changed my name, and prayed he'd never find me." "Your daughter is Victor's?" "Yeah." Emma wiped her eyes. "That's why I run when I see you, because you look like her. You have the same eyes, same smile, and it kills me every time because I know what he's doing to you, and I couldn't save you any more than I could save myself." By the time they left Emma's trailer, it was past midnight. Lena sat in Caleb's truck and stared at her hands. "He has a daughter," she said numbly, "and he doesn't even know. Probably better that way." "Is it?" "That little girl is growing up without a father because her mother is too terrified to ask for child support. She's growing up alive because her mother was smart enough to run." Caleb started the engine. "Emma made the right call." "Did she? Or did she just let him win?" Caleb looked at her. "You can't save everyone, Lena. Sometimes survival is the only victory you get." But Lena wasn't thinking about survival anymore. She was thinking about Emma's daughter, about Sarah and Jennifer and Rachel, about every woman who'd ever crossed Victor's path and paid the price. She was thinking about the fact that running wasn't good enough, not anymore. "Christine said she needed proof he was married to the others," Lena said suddenly. "Marriage certificates, property records, that kind of thing." "Yeah. Where would those be kept?" "County clerk's office, probably." "Why?" "Because if we can prove he used fake names to marry those women, that's fraud. And fraud doesn't have the same statute of limitations as assault." Caleb's expression shifted. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I'm thinking Victor keeps copies of all his important documents in a safe in his office. And I'm thinking I still have a key to that office." Lena met his eyes. "I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense." Breaking into Victor's office turned out to be the easiest part of everything Lena had done so far. The hard part was living with what she found inside. They'd planned it carefully. Victor had a standing poker game every Thursday night at Mayor Drummond's house, which meant he'd be occupied from 8 p.m. until at least midnight. His office building was downtown, a renovated brick structure that housed his real estate development company on the 2nd floor. The building had security cameras, but Caleb knew the guy who monitored them, a veteran named Torres who owed Caleb a favor from way back. 2 hours, Torres had said when Caleb called him. "That's all I can give you. After that, the recordings get backed up automatically, and I can't delete them." 2 hours. Lena figured that would be enough. She and Caleb arrived at 9:15, parking 2 blocks away and approaching through the alley behind the building. Lena's hands shook as she fit the key into the back entrance, but the lock turned smoothly. Victor had given her this key years ago, back when he still pretended to include her in his business decisions. He'd probably forgotten she even had it. The stairwell was dark and smelled like old carpet. They climbed to the second floor in silence, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. At the top, another door, another key. Then they were inside Victor's private office. Lena hadn't been here in over a year. It looked exactly the same. Expensive desk, leather chairs, framed photos of Victor shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. There was even a picture of their wedding day on the credenza, both of them smiling like they had their whole lives ahead of them. She wanted to smash it. "Where's the safe?" Caleb asked quietly. "Behind the bookshelf. Left side." They moved the shelf together, revealing a wall safe that was probably worth more than Lena's car. It had an electronic keypad, the kind that required a 6-digit code. "You know the combination?" Caleb asked. "I know Victor." Lena punched in their wedding anniversary. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside was exactly what she'd expected. Stacks of cash, property deeds, insurance documents, and 3 thick folders labeled with women's names. Sarah Patterson, Jennifer Yates, Rachel Simmons. Lena pulled out the folders with trembling hands. The first page in Sarah's folder was a marriage certificate dated 9 years ago. The groom's name was listed as Victor J. Hale. Same middle initial as her Victor, but the birth date was off by 2 years and the social security number didn't match the one Lena knew. "He used variations," she said, flipping through the pages. "Changed small details each time. Not enough to be obvious fraud, but enough that the records wouldn't automatically flag him as already married." "Smart," Caleb muttered. "Thick, but smart." The folders contained everything. Marriage certificates, life insurance policies, naming Victor as the sole beneficiary, copies of death certificates, bank statements showing the transfer of assets after each woman died. It was a roadmap of 3 murders, meticulously documented and filed away like any other business transaction. At the bottom of Rachel Simmons' folder, Lena found something that made her stomach drop. A handwritten ledger with dates, amounts, and names. Victor's handwriting, unmistakable. "What is that?" Caleb leaned over her shoulder. "Bribes, I think." Lena traced one entry with her finger. "Look. Dawes. $5,000, November 2019. That's right after Rachel died." "Sheriff Dawes?" "Yeah, and here's one for Drummond. $10,000, March 2020. She kept reading, her horror growing with each line. "He's been paying them off. The sheriff, the mayor, the county coroner, anyone who might ask questions about his wives dying." Caleb took the ledger from her and photographed each page with his phone. "Christine is going to lose her mind when she sees this. We need copies of everything." Lena started pulling documents from the folders. The marriage certificates, the insurance policies, all of it. They spent the next hour photographing every page, every document, every piece of evidence that Victor had carefully preserved. Lena didn't understand why he'd kept it all. Arrogance, maybe. Or maybe he liked having proof of what he'd gotten away with. It was when they were almost done that Lena found the 4th folder. It was at the very back of the safe, underneath a stack of bonds. The label made her blood run cold. Lena M. Whitmore. Her hands froze. "Caleb." He looked up from the insurance documents he was photographing. "What?" She held up the folder. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Don't open it," Caleb said finally. "I have to." Lena, but she was already opening it. The first page was a life insurance policy, taken out 6 months after their wedding. $1 million, with Victor as the beneficiary. She'd never seen it before, never signed anything. Her signature at the bottom looked perfect. He must have forged it. The second page was worse. A handwritten timeline in Victor's writing, detailing the progression of their relationship. When they'd met. When he'd proposed. When the discipline had started. Each incident of violence was noted with clinical precision, along with observations about how Lena had responded. "Subject requires more physical correction than previous wives," one entry read. "More resistant to conditioning, may need to escalate timeline." Escalate timeline. The third page was a draft obituary. Lena Marie Whitmore, beloved wife of Victor Hale, died tragically on... The date was blank. waiting to be filled in. The rest was already written. After a long struggle with depression and anxiety, Lena took her own life at the family home. She is survived by her devoted husband, who asked for privacy during this difficult time. Lena's vision started to narrow, black spots dancing at the edges. She heard Caleb saying her name from very far away, felt his hand on her shoulder, but she couldn't respond. Couldn't breathe. He'd planned it. Her death. Her obituary. Probably already had the scene staged in his head, pills maybe, or a bathtub. Something that would look like suicide. Something that would get him sympathy instead of suspicion. "Lena, breathe," Caleb's voice cut through the panic. "I need you to breathe." She sucked in air, then another breath, then another. Slowly, the office came back into focus. Caleb was crouched in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, his face level with hers. "He was going to kill me," she whispered. "I know. Not someday. Soon. That's what escalate timeline means. I know. If I hadn't left that night, if I'd stayed." "But you didn't stay. You're here. You're safe." Caleb's grip tightened. "And now we have proof, not just of what he did to the others, but what he was planning to do to you." Lena looked down at the folder in her shaking hands, at the carefully planned murder disguised as suicide, at the insurance policy she'd never agreed to, at the timeline documenting her own destruction. "Photograph it," she said, her voice hard. "All of it. Every single page." They finished just before 11. Caleb put everything back exactly as they'd found it, closed the safe, moved the bookshelf back into place. They wiped down every surface they'd touched, erasing any evidence that they'd been there. As they were leaving, Lena took one last look at Victor's office, at the success he'd built on the graves of 4 women, at the respectability he'd bought with blood money and bribery. She'd been so afraid of him for so long, afraid of his fists, his words, his ability to make her feel small and worthless. But standing there in his office, holding evidence of his crimes, she felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, but it had been joined by something else. Rage. Cold, focused, absolute rage. "Let's go," she said. The next morning, Christine Valdez drove down from Tucson with a team of investigators. They met in a conference room at the county courthouse, neutral territory that Victor's money hadn't quite reached yet. Christine spread the photographs across the table like a dealer laying out cards. "This is incredible. Marriage fraud, insurance fraud, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit murder. We can bring charges on at least a dozen counts before we even get to the murders themselves." "Will it stick?" Lena asked. "With this evidence? Absolutely. The ledger alone is enough to bring down half the county government." Christine looked up, her expression serious. "But you understand what's going to happen when we file these charges, right? Victor will come after you with everything he has, his lawyers, his money, his connections. He'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive, a scorned wife making false accusations. Let him try. He'll dig into your past, find every mistake you've ever made, every weakness, and use it against you. He'll make your life hell." "He's already made my life hell," Lena said. "At least this time I'll be fighting back." Christine studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, here's what happens next. We're going to arrest Victor on fraud charges first. That gives us the legal justification to search his office and home, which will give us the physical evidence to match these photographs. Once we have that, we can move on to the murder charges." "How long?" "The warrant should come through in the next few days, maybe a week." Christine started gathering the photographs. "In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere safe, somewhere Victor can't find you." "She's staying with me," Caleb said. It was the first time he'd spoken since the meeting started. Christine looked between them. "Are you two?" "No," Lena said quickly. "He's just helping me." "Good. Because if the defense can paint this as an affair, it'll complicate things." Christine closed her briefcase. "I'll be in touch as soon as the warrant is approved. Until then, keep your head down and don't engage with Victor under any circumstances." That turned out to be harder than expected. Victor showed up at the Dusty Rose 3 days later. Lena was in the kitchen, helping with the lunch rush, when she heard his voice in the dining room. That familiar laugh, warm and charming, talking to someone about a land deal. She froze, her hands submerged in dishwater. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Stay here." He knows I work here. I know. That's why I'm handling this. Caleb's expression was grim. Stay. Here. She stayed, but she moved closer to the door so she could hear. Oh, just want to talk to my wife, Victor was saying, his tone reasonable. Haven't seen her in almost a month. I'm worried about her. She doesn't want to see you. Caleb's voice was flat, unmoved. Did she tell you that? Or are you making decisions for her? I'm respecting her wishes. Her wishes? Victor laughed. You really think you know what she wishes? You've known her for what, a few months? I've been married to her for 7 years. Yeah, and you've been beating her for all 7 of them. The dining room went silent. Lena could picture it. Customers frozen mid-bite. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Everyone staring. That's a serious accusation, Victor said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You got proof? More than you'd like. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been harboring my wife against her will, filling her head with lies, maybe taking advantage of a vulnerable woman going through a difficult time. Is that what you're going to tell people? It's what I'm going to tell the sheriff when I file a report. Victor's voice was smooth now, confident. Alienation of affection, unlawful interference with a marriage, maybe some kidnapping charges if I really push it. You can't kidnap someone who left voluntarily, can't I? Because Lena has a history of mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. Makes her unreliable, suggestible. Lena heard footsteps, Victor moving closer. I've got medical records documenting her instability. Prescriptions for antidepressants she stopped taking. A therapist who'll testify that she struggles with reality sometimes. You're lying. Am I? Or have I just been very thorough? Victor's laugh was cold. See, Rourke, you're playing checkers. I've been playing chess for a long time, and I'm very good at it. Lena's hands had started shaking again. Victor had never mentioned mental health issues. She'd never seen a therapist, never taken antidepressants. But if he had documentation, forged or not, it would be his word against hers, and his word carried a lot more weight. Get out of my restaurant, Caleb said. I'm a paying customer. Not any more leave. Now. There was a long pause. Then Victor's voice, silky and venomous. Tell Lena I'll see her soon, whether she wants to or not. Footsteps. The door opening and closing. Then silence. Lena waited a full minute before stepping into the dining room. Every customer was staring at her. She could see the questions in their eyes, the speculation starting to form. By tonight, half the town would be talking about Victor Hale's unstable wife who'd run off with the motel owner. Back to work, Caleb said loudly, addressing the room. Show's over. The customers slowly returned to their meals, but Lena could feel their eyes following her as she retreated to the kitchen. That night, lying in room 12 with the door locked and the curtains drawn, Lena called Christine Valdez. He's building a counter-narrative, she said without preamble, claiming I'm mentally unstable, that Caleb is manipulating me. I expected that. Christine sounded unsurprised. It's a classic defense strategy. Discredit the victim before she can testify. Will it work? Not if we move fast. The warrant came through this afternoon. We're executing it tomorrow morning. Lena sat up. Tomorrow? 6 a.m. Sheriff's deputies and state investigators are going to search Victor's office and home simultaneously. He won't have time to destroy evidence or prepare a defense. Christine paused. You should probably stay away from town tomorrow. Things are going to get ugly. But Lena didn't stay away. She couldn't. At 5:30 the next morning, she and Caleb drove to a spot overlooking Victor's office building. They parked on a hill about a block away, close enough to see but far enough to avoid being noticed. At exactly 6 a.m., 3 police cruisers and 2 unmarked cars pulled up to the building. Officers emerged, along with people in windbreakers marked State Investigator. They moved with military precision, some going in the front entrance while others covered the back. 15 minutes later, they emerged carrying boxes. Lots of boxes. They found it, Caleb said quietly. Lena pressed her hand against the car window, watching as Victor's empire started to crumble. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she just felt numb. Her phone rang. Christine. They got everything, the prosecutor said. The safe, the ledgers, the folders on all 3 wives. Even found a burner phone with text messages coordinating the bribes. Victor's in custody. We're charging him with fraud and conspiracy to start, but the murder charges are coming. Where is he now? County jail. He'll be arraigned this afternoon. Christine's voice softened. How are you doing? I don't know yet. That's fair? Listen, the arraignment is at 2 p.m. if you want to be there. You don't have to testify or speak, but you have the right to be in the courtroom. Lena looked at Caleb. He was watching her, waiting. I'll be there, she said. The courthouse was packed. Apparently, the arrest of Redemption Flat's most prominent citizen had drawn a crowd. Lena recognized faces from around town, business owners, politicians, regular customers from the diner. Some looked shocked. Others looked almost gleeful, like they'd been waiting for Victor to fall. Sheriff Dawes was there too, sitting in the back with his arms crossed and his face red. Mayor Drummond sat a few rows ahead, pointedly not making eye contact with anyone. Christine had saved Lena a seat near the front. Caleb sat beside her, a solid presence that kept her anchored as the room filled and the noise level rose. At exactly 2 p.m., the bailiff called for order. Everyone stood as Judge Harrison entered, an older man with steel gray hair and a reputation for being unmovable once he'd made a decision. Then Victor was led in. Lena's breath caught. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, his hair uncombed, his face showing signs of a sleepless night. For the first time since she'd known him, Victor Hale looked small. His eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on her. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Lena waited for the fear to hit, for her instinct to look away, to make herself smaller. It didn't come. Instead, she lifted her chin and held his gaze. Didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just looked at him with the full weight of everything she knew, everything she'd survived, everything she was about to reveal. Victor's expression darkened. Then his lawyer, some expensive suit from Phoenix, leaned over and whispered something, and Victor looked away. Judge Harrison read the charges. 4 counts of marriage fraud, 3 counts of insurance fraud, 6 counts of bribery, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. How does the defendant plead? Harrison asked. Victor's lawyer stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Bail? We request bail be set at a reasonable amount. Mr. Hale is a respected businessman with deep ties to this community. He's not a flight risk. Christine stood. The prosecution opposes bail, Your Honor. The defendant has significant financial resources, documented history of violence against women, and is accused of murdering 3 previous wives. He is absolutely a flight risk and a danger to the community. Harrison considered this. Bail is set at $500,000, cash only. Defendant will surrender his passport and wear a monitoring device. Next court date is, Your Honor, if I may. Christine's voice cut through the murmuring. The prosecution has additional charges we'd like to file. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Additional charges? Yes, Your Honor. Based on evidence obtained during the search, we're adding 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Sarah Patterson, Jennifer Yates, and Rachel Simmons. We're also adding 1 count of attempted murder for the planned killing of Lena Whitmore. The courtroom erupted. People shouting, reporters scrambling for their phones, the bailiff calling for order. Through it all, Lena kept her eyes on Victor. He'd gone completely still, his face drained of color. This was real. This was happening. All his carefully constructed lies, all his power and connections, none of it was enough to stop this. Harrison banged his gavel. Order! I will have order! When the room finally quieted, he turned to Christine. These are serious charges, Counselor. We have serious evidence, Your Honor. Documented planning for Mrs. Whitmore's murder, including a forged life insurance policy and a pre-written obituary. We have proof that Mr. Hale used false identities to marry multiple women, all of whom died under suspicious circumstances, with Mr. Hale as the sole beneficiary of their estates. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Victor's lawyer sputtered. The prosecution has physical evidence, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of behavior spanning nearly a decade. Christine interrupted. We're prepared to present it all. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, bail is revoked. Defendant will remain in custody until trial. Given the severity of these charges, I'm also ordering a full investigation into potential corruption charges against any public officials who may have assisted in covering up these crimes. Dawes stood up so fast his chair fell over. Your Honor, I object. Sheriff Dawes, sit down before I hold you in contempt. Harrison's voice was ice. In fact, I'm ordering you to surrender your badge and weapon pending investigation. Deputy Chief Marcus will assume your duties effective immediately. The courtroom exploded again. Lena watched as Dawes' face went from red to purple, as Drummond tried to sneak out a side door only to be stopped by a state investigator, as Victor's lawyer frantically flipped through papers looking for some argument that would undo what was happening. But it was done. It was really done. Victor was led away, still handcuffed, still in that orange jumpsuit. As he passed Lena's row, he stopped. This isn't over, he said quietly. Only she could hear him. I will destroy you for this. Before she could respond, Caleb stood up. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Just positioned himself between Victor and Lena, 6'4" of silent threat. The deputy escorting Victor tugged on his arm. Let's go. Victor hesitated one more second, then allowed himself to be led away. Lena watched until he disappeared through the door. Then she slumped in her seat, suddenly exhausted. You okay? Caleb asked. I don't know. She looked at her hands. They were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Is this real? Did that actually just happen? It happened. He's really in jail. For now, there's still a trial. I know, but for now... Lena's voice broke. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back tears that came anyway. For now, he can't hurt me. Caleb's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. No, he can't. Christine appeared beside them, looking energized despite the chaos. That went better than expected. Harrison clearly isn't buying Victor's golden boy act. She lowered her voice. But you need to prepare yourself. The defense is going to come after you hard. They'll dig up everything, your marriage, your past, every argument you ever had with Victor. They'll try to paint you as the villain here. Let them try, Lena said, wiping her eyes. I've got the truth. That has to count for something. It does, but trials aren't always about truth. They're about what you can prove. Christine handed her a card. My office number. Call me anytime, day or night. We're going to get through this. All of us. As they left the courthouse, Lena noticed people staring. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical. A few looked openly hostile, like she'd betrayed some unspoken code by speaking out against Victor. An older woman stopped directly in front of her on the courthouse steps. You should be ashamed, she said loudly. Victor Hale is a good man. He donated money to build our community center, and you're trying to destroy him with lies. Before Lena could respond, another voice cut in. He murdered 3 women. It was Margaret Chen standing a few steps away. She'd been in the courtroom too, Lena realized. Probably had been there the whole time. He murdered 3 women, Margaret repeated, louder. And he assaulted me. And he would have killed Lena too if she hadn't been brave enough to stop him. The older woman's face flushed. You don't know that. I know exactly that, because I was there when he threatened me. Margaret moved closer to Lena, standing beside her. So maybe instead of defending a murderer, you should think about how many other women in this town have been too scared to speak up. A third voice joined in. Diana Casper, who'd driven down from Phoenix for the arraignment. He's not who you think he is. None of us wanted to believe it either, but the evidence doesn't lie. Then Emma Hartley, holding her daughter's hand. I stayed silent for 6 years. I'm not staying silent anymore. One by one, women started stepping forward. Some Lena recognized, others she'd never seen before. Each one had a story. Each one had been hurt or threatened or terrorized by Victor Hale in some way. And each one was choosing, right there on the courthouse steps, to stand with Lena instead of against her. The older woman looked around, suddenly uncertain. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Lena stared at the women surrounding her, this unlikely group of survivors who'd found the courage to speak up. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank us yet, Margaret said. This is just the beginning. Wait until the trial actually starts. She was right. The trial was still months away. Victor's lawyers would use every delay tactic, every legal maneuver they could think of. The press would dissect every aspect of Lena's life. The town would take sides, families would split, friendships would end. It was going to be brutal. But standing there on those courthouse steps, surrounded by women who'd survived the same monster, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone clinging to escape, but the solid, unmovable hope of someone who decided to fight and discovered she wasn't fighting alone. The sun was setting over Redemption Flats, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the county jail, Victor Hale was sitting in a cell, probably already planning his defense, already scheming his way back to freedom. Let him plan, Lena thought. Let him scheme. Because for the first time she wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she was standing her ground, and she had an army of survivors standing with her. And that, she was beginning to realize, was more powerful than all of Victor's money and connections combined. The hope lasted exactly 4 days. That was how long it took for Victor's legal team to launch their counterattack. They started with the media, giving interviews to every news outlet within 100 miles. Victor's lead attorney, a shark named Garrett Mills, who'd made his reputation defending white-collar criminals, painted a picture of a devoted husband victimized by a mentally unstable wife and her manipulative lover. The story hit the local news first, then spread. By the end of the week, Lena's face was on television screens across the state, usually paired with unflattering photos that made her look haggard and desperate. The headlines were worse. Wife's accusations or elaborate revenge plot. Friends say Hale marriage was troubled but not abusive. Business owner accused of harboring runaway wife. Lena stopped watching the news after the third day, but she couldn't stop people from talking. She'd go to the grocery store and conversations would stop mid-sentence when she walked by. Women who used to smile and wave now turned away or suddenly became very interested in reading labels. The cashier who'd always made small talk now rang up her items in stony silence. One afternoon, someone spray-painted "liar" across the windshield of her car. Another time, she found a dead rat on the doorstep of room 12 with a note. Homewreckers get what they deserve. Caleb wanted to call the police, but Lena pointed out that half the police force probably agreed with the sentiment. The new acting sheriff, Marcus, was better than Dawes, but he was also overwhelmed trying to clean up the corruption his predecessor had left behind. Just ignore it, Lena said, even though her hands were shaking as she threw the rat in the dumpster. They want a reaction. Don't give them one. But ignoring it got harder every day. The worst part wasn't the strangers who believed Victor's lies. It was the people Lena had thought she knew. Neighbors she'd smiled at for years now crossed the street to avoid her. Women from her old book club published an open letter in the newspaper defending Victor's character and suggesting Lena seek professional help. Even her own mother called, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. "I saw the news," Mom said without preamble. "Please tell me this is all some kind of misunderstanding." Lena pressed the phone harder against her ear. "It's not a misunderstanding. Victor hurt me, Mom, for 7 years, and he killed 3 other women before me." "That's insane. Victor's always been so charming, so that's how he gets away with it." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "You know what people are saying about you and that motel owner?" "Caleb's helping me, that's all. That's not what it looks like. It looks like you had an affair, and now you're trying to destroy your husband's reputation to justify it." Lena closed her eyes. "You don't believe me. I believe you think Victor hurt you. But sweetheart, you've always been sensitive, overly emotional. Remember when you were little, how you'd cry over the smallest things? Maybe you're blowing normal marital problems out of proportion. He broke my ribs, Mom. He split my lip so many times I lost count. He had my obituary written and ready to go. People write strange things when they're upset. He murdered 3 women, Lena's voice cracked. Why can't you hear me? I am hearing you. I'm just trying to understand why you'd throw away a perfectly good marriage over some bruises that... Lena hung up. She sat there on the edge of the bed in room 12, phone in her lap, and felt something fundamental break inside her. Her own mother didn't believe her. Her own mother thought she was hysterical, oversensitive, making mountains out of molehills. She didn't call back, and her mother didn't call again either. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late August, which gave Victor's team 2 months to destroy Lena's credibility. They used every day. First, they leaked her medical records, or what they claimed were her medical records. Documentation of depression, anxiety, and paranoid delusions dating back 5 years. Lena had never seen these records before, had never been diagnosed with any of those conditions, but the documents looked official enough that the media ran with it. Wife's mental health issues raised questions about accusations. Then they produced witnesses. A former coworker who claimed Lena had once made false accusations about sexual harassment to get attention. A neighbor who said she'd seen Lena and Caleb having intimate conversations weeks before she left Victor. The owner of a bar who swore he'd served Lena and Caleb drinks together multiple times, implying an ongoing affair. All of it was either fabricated or twisted beyond recognition, but it didn't matter. The story was taking hold. Unstable wife, manipulative boyfriend, innocent husband caught in the crossfire. Christine tried to counter it with facts, the physical evidence from Victor's safe, the testimony from Margaret and Diana and Emma, the forensic analysis showing the marriage certificates were fraudulent. But facts were boring compared to scandal. The media much preferred the soap opera version. Lena started having nightmares. She'd dream she was in the courtroom on the witness stand, and every time she tried to speak the truth, her voice would come out as lies. She'd wake up gasping, convinced she'd already lost. Caleb found her like that one night around 3 a.m., sitting on the floor of room 12 with her knees pulled to her chest, trying to breathe through a panic attack. "Hey." He crouched down beside her, not touching, just present. "You're okay. You're safe." "I'm not." The words came out strangled. "I'm not safe. I'm not okay. Victor's going to win. He always wins. He hasn't won yet. Look at what they're doing to me. Look at what people believe." Lena pressed her hands to her face. "My own mother thinks I'm crazy. Half the town thinks I'm a liar. The other half thinks I'm a whore. How am I supposed to testify when nobody's going to believe me anyway?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I learned in the army?" "What?" "That the truth is like water. You can try to dam it, redirect it, pollute it, but it always finds a way through eventually." He shifted to sit beside her, his back against the wall. "Victor's team is good. They're making you look bad, making people doubt, but they can't change the physical evidence. They can't explain away those marriage certificates, or the ledgers, or the forged insurance policies. They don't have to explain it away. They just have to create enough doubt that a jury won't convict. Maybe. But you know what else they can't change? The fact that you're still here, still fighting. That counts for something." "Does it?" Lena's voice was bitter. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I traded one kind of hell for another. At least when I was with Victor, I knew what to expect. This," she gestured vaguely at the room, at everything beyond it. "I don't know how to do this, how to be this person everyone's watching and judging. You do it one day at a time, same way you survived 7 years with him. That's different. Surviving and fighting are completely different things. Not as different as you think." Caleb turned to look at her. "Every day you didn't give up was an act of resistance. Every time you got back up after he knocked you down was a form of fighting. You've been fighting your whole marriage. You're just doing it publicly now." Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like the strong survivor he seemed to think she was. But mostly, she just felt tired, bone-deep exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "What if I can't do this?" she whispered. "Then you can't, and we'll figure out something else." "You can't just figure out something else when you've already blown up your whole life." "Sure you can. That's what second chances are for." Lena looked at him, this quiet, damaged man who'd inserted himself into her nightmare for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I told you about the woman from my unit, the captain's wife." "Yeah. What I didn't tell you was that she asked me for help. 2 weeks before she died, she pulled me aside and asked if I could help her leave. Said she was afraid he was going to kill her." Caleb's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "And I said no. Told her it wasn't my place to interfere in a marriage, that she should talk to the chaplain or the commanding officer." "Caleb!" 3 days later, they pulled her out of the river, and I had to stand there at her funeral, listening to her husband cry crocodile tears, knowing I could have saved her, and didn't. He looked down at his hands. "I joined the army thinking I'd protect people. Turns out the person who needed protecting most was right there, and I was too much of a coward to do anything about it." Lena didn't know what to say. What could you say to someone carrying that kind of guilt? "So that's why," Caleb continued. "Not because I'm noble or brave, because I'm trying to be less of a coward than I was 20 years ago. Trying to make up for the one time it really mattered, and I failed." He met her eyes. "You asked me to help you fight. That's the first time someone's asked, and I didn't say no. I'm not stopping now. Something in Lena's chest loosened slightly. She wasn't alone in this. Even when it felt like the whole world was against her, she had at least one person who understood why this mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything." "No, but we haven't lost either." The preliminary hearing arrived on a scorching Tuesday in late August. The temperature hit 103 by 9 a.m., and the courthouse air conditioning was struggling to keep up. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. More hostile, more divided. Victor's supporters sat on one side. Business associates, friends, people who'd benefited from his generosity over the years. Lena's supporters sat on the other. Margaret, Diana, Emma, a handful of domestic violence advocates Christine had brought in from Tucson, and Caleb, who sat directly behind Lena like a human shield. Victor was already seated at the defense table when Lena entered. He'd lost weight during his 2 months in jail, and his expensive suit hung a little loose on his frame. But he'd clearly been preparing for this moment. His hair was perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven, his expression radiating wounded innocence. When he saw Lena, he smiled. Not the cold smile she was used to, but something that looked almost sad, regretful, like he was the victim here and she was the one who'd hurt him. She looked away quickly, focusing on Christine instead. "Remember what we talked about," Christine said quietly. "Don't react to anything Mills says. Don't let them see you get upset. The calmer you appear, the better." "What if I can't stay calm?" "Then fake it. Fake it until you can't fake it anymore. Then excuse yourself to the bathroom and fall apart there." Christine squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this." Judge Harrison entered and everyone stood. He looked even more severe than he had at the arraignment, his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial," he began. "Counselor Mills, you may present your motion." Mills stood, all polished confidence. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Hale on the grounds of insufficient evidence and prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecution's entire case rests on the uncorroborated testimony of a mentally unstable woman who has clear motive to fabricate these allegations." "Your Honor," Christine started to stand. "I'll hear the prosecution's response in due time, Counselor Valdez. Continue, Mr. Mills." "Thank you, Your Honor. The facts are simple. Mrs. Whitmore left her husband and began a romantic relationship with Mr. Rourke. When Mr. Hale attempted to reconcile, she manufactured allegations of abuse to justify her infidelity. She then convinced Mr. Rourke to break into Mr. Hale's private office and steal confidential documents. Those documents prove fraud and murder," Christine interjected. "Those documents were obtained illegally," Mills shot back. "Breaking and entering, theft, violation of attorney-client privilege. Every piece of evidence the prosecution has is fruit of the poisonous tree and should be excluded." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious claim, Mr. Mills. You're suggesting the entire investigation is tainted?" "I'm saying that the prosecution allowed a civilian to commit felony burglary to obtain evidence they couldn't legally acquire themselves. That's not investigation. That's entrapment." Christine was on her feet. "Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore had legal access to that office. She was given a key by her husband and had visited the premises multiple times during their marriage. There was no breaking and entering. She had no legal right to access a locked safe containing privileged documents," Mills countered. "A safe containing evidence of planned murder and insurance fraud. Alleged evidence, photographed evidence, Your Honor. Marriage certificates under false names, forged insurance policies, a ledger documenting bribes to public officials. We have independent forensic analysis confirming the authenticity of these documents." Harrison held up a hand. "I'll review the motion to suppress evidence separately. For now, let's focus on whether probable cause exists. Counselor Valdez, present your case." Christine spent the next 2 hours laying out the prosecution's evidence. She called a forensic document examiner who testified that the marriage certificates showed signs of alteration and that Victor had used at least 3 different variations of his identity. She presented financial records showing large insurance payouts after each wife's death. She showed the court photographs of the ledger with Victor's own handwriting documenting payments to Sheriff Dawes and Mayor Drummond. Then she called Margaret Chen to the stand. Margaret looked terrified, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. But when Christine asked her to describe her interactions with Victor, Her voice steadied. He cornered me in a supply closet, put his hand around my throat, told me nobody would believe me if I reported him because he was Victor Hale and I was nobody. Mills was on his feet immediately. Objection. This is hearsay and irrelevant to the charges. It speaks to pattern of behavior, Your Honor, Christine said. I'll allow it. Continue, Ms. Chen. Margaret described the assault, the threats, her decision to quit rather than risk worse. Mills cross-examined her aggressively, trying to poke holes in her timeline, questioning why she hadn't reported it at the time, suggesting she might be misremembering or exaggerating. Or maybe, Margaret said, her voice rising, I was scared. Because men like Victor Hale don't face consequences. They destroy the women who accuse them, just like he's trying to destroy Lena right now. Diana testified next, describing the break-in and the threatening note. Emma followed, telling the court about the pregnancy, the beating, her decision to hide. You're claiming Mr. Hale has a daughter he doesn't know about? Mills asked during cross-examination. Yes. And you've never sought child support? No. Why not? Because I was afraid he'd kill me if he found out she survived. Mills smiled like he'd just won something. So you've been committing welfare fraud for 6 years by not reporting the father's identity. Emma's face flushed. I've been keeping my daughter safe. Or you've been hiding the fact that Mr. Hale isn't actually the father, and you're using this trial to extort money from a wealthy man. That's not... No further questions. Emma left the stand in tears. Lena watched her go and felt rage building in her chest. This was what they did. Took survivors and twisted their survival into evidence of dishonesty. Made their fear look like manipulation. Then Christine called Caleb. He took the stand calmly, his massive frame making the witness chair look like children's furniture. He described finding Lena in the kitchen with fresh bruises, offering her the room, the confrontation with Victor. And when did your relationship with Mrs. Whitmore become romantic? Mills asked during cross-examination. It hasn't. Mills raised an eyebrow. You're asking this court to believe that you've been harboring an attractive woman in your motel for 2 months and nothing physical has happened between you? I'm not asking the court to believe anything. I'm telling you what happened. You expect us to believe you're just a good Samaritan with no ulterior motives? I expect you to listen to what I'm saying instead of making up stories that fit your narrative. Harrison banged his gavel. Mr. Mills, ask questions or sit down. But the damage was done. Lena could see it on the jurors' faces, the skepticism, the assumption that of course something was going on between her and Caleb. Because why else would a man help a woman unless he wanted something from her? Finally, Christine called Lena herself. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to an execution. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. She could feel Victor's gaze burning into her back. The bailiff swore her in. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely raise it. Christine started with easy questions. Background, how she'd met Victor, when they'd married. Then slowly, carefully, she guided Lena through the 7 years of abuse. Can you describe the first time Mr. Hale hit you? Lena took a breath. It was about 6 months after we got married. We'd just moved to Redemption Flats. I disagreed with him about something small, what movie to watch, I think, and he backhanded me across the face. What did you do? Nothing. I was too shocked to do anything. Did he apologize? Yes. He cried. Said it would never happen again. But it did happen again. 2 weeks later, and then it kept happening. Once a week, twice a week, sometimes every day. It depended on his mood. Christine had her walk through specific incidents. The broken ribs, the concussion, the night he'd choked her until she passed out. Lena's voice remained steady through most of it, but when she got to the night Victor had confessed to killing the others, her composure cracked. He told me about Sarah falling down the stairs, Jennifer falling off the cliff, Rachel's brakes being cut. He laughed about it, said everyone believed him, said I'd be next if I didn't. Her voice broke. If I didn't stop changing, stop pulling away. No further questions, Christine said quietly. Mills approached the stand like a shark smelling blood. Mrs. Whitmore, you claim to have been terrified of your husband for 7 years, correct? Yes. Yet you stayed with him. You didn't call the police, didn't tell your family, didn't seek help from any domestic violence organizations. Why is that? Because I was scared. Because I had nowhere to go. Because Victor controlled all the money and you had a job at the Dusty Rose Diner. You earned your own money. Minimum wage and tips. Not enough to not enough to rent an apartment? Buy a bus ticket? Make a phone call? Mills's smile was sharp. Or is the truth that you stayed because the lifestyle Mr. Hale provided was worth enduring some rough patches in your marriage? Lena's hands clenched. No. No? You lived in a beautiful home, drove a nice car, had access to credit cards and bank accounts. Seems like you were doing quite well for someone who was supposedly being held prisoner. Material things don't make up for being beaten. Of course not. But they do make your claim that you had no options seem a bit disingenuous, don't they? Christine objected, but Harrison overruled her. Mills continued, his voice smooth and reasonable. Let's talk about the night you claim Mr. Hale confessed to murder. He'd been drinking, correct? Yes. Heavily drinking? Yes. To the point of being intoxicated? He was very drunk. So drunk he could barely stand, according to your statement. So drunk he passed out immediately afterward. Mills paused. Mrs. Whitmore, is it possible that your husband was simply rambling, saying things that didn't make sense because he was inebriated? No, he was specific. He gave details that could have come from anywhere, newspaper articles, town gossip, your own imagination filling in gaps. Mills leaned against the witness box. Or are you asking this court to believe that a man drunk enough to pass out was also sober enough to deliver a detailed confession to multiple murders? He knew things that weren't in the newspapers, such as… Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. The problem was, most of what Victor had said that night was information that could have been public knowledge. The staircase fall, the hiking accident, the car crash, the specific details, the cut brake lines, the planned timeline. She couldn't prove he'd said those things. It was just her word. Mills saw her hesitation and pounced. You can't answer because there are no details, are there? Just the rambling of a drunk man and the convenient interpretation of a wife looking for justification to leave. That's not… Let's talk about your relationship with Mr. Rourke. When did it begin? We don't have a relationship. He was helping me. Helping you by offering you a private room at his motel? By taking photographs of your body? By accompanying you on late-night break-ins? Mills's voice dripped with insinuation. That seems like an awful lot of help for a man who barely knew you. He was being kind. Or he was a man interested in an attractive married woman who seemed vulnerable and available. Objection! Christine was on her feet. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Mr. Mills, stick to questions. But again, the damage was done. Mills had planted the seed. Adulterous wife, manipulative boyfriend, convenient accusations. No further questions, Mills said, returning to his seat with a satisfied smile. Lena left the stand feeling like she'd been filleted. Every word she'd said had been twisted, every truth turned into a potential lie. Harrison called a recess. Lena barely made it to the bathroom before she started hyperventilating. Christine followed her in, holding her hair while she dry-heaved over the toilet, then helping her rinse her mouth and fix her makeup. I know that was brutal, Christine said, but you did good. You stayed calm. You told the truth. That's all we can ask. He made me sound like a liar. That's his job. Our job is to make sure the evidence speaks louder than his insinuations. They returned to the courtroom for closing arguments. Mills went first, painting Victor as a successful businessman victimized by a vindictive wife and her lover. Christine countered with the physical evidence, the pattern of behavior, the testimony of multiple witnesses. Then they waited while Harrison reviewed his notes. 20 minutes later, he looked up. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. While the defense raises valid questions about the circumstances under which certain evidence was obtained, I find that sufficient probable cause exists to proceed to trial on all charges. Harrison's expression was grave. This case involves serious allegations of domestic violence, fraud, and murder. A jury should hear the full evidence and make their determination. Trial is set for November 15th in the Superior Court in Tucson. Relief flooded through Lena so fast she felt dizzy. They were going to trial. Victor wasn't walking away. But the relief was short-lived. As the courtroom began to empty, Victor's voice cut through the noise. This isn't over, Lena. She turned. He was being led away by deputies, but he'd stopped to look directly at her. You think you've won something, he said. But all you've done is guarantee that every ugly detail of your life is going to be dragged out in public. Every mistake. every weakness. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you'll wish you'd just stayed quiet. One of the deputies tugged his arm. Let's go, Mr. Hale. But Victor kept his eyes on Lena. I will destroy you for this, if it's the last thing I do. Then he was gone, led back to his cell. Lena stood frozen in place. She should have felt vindicated. They were going to trial. She'd done what she set out to do, so why did it feel like she'd just painted a target on her own back? That night, back in room 12, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Victor's face in the courtroom, the absolute certainty in his eyes when he'd promised to destroy her. He meant it. She knew he meant it. Around 2 a.m., there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Caleb standing there with 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either, he said. They sat outside on the small porch, watching the desert night. The temperature had finally dropped to something bearable, and the stars were bright enough to cast shadows. You okay? Caleb asked after a while. Lena laughed quietly. No, not even close. Fair enough. I keep thinking about what he said, about destroying me. And the thing is, he's probably right. By the time this trial is over, everyone's going to know everything about me. All the times I went back to him. All the times I believed his apologies. All the ways I wasn't the perfect victim. There's no such thing as a perfect victim. I know that. But juries want one anyway. Lena sipped her coffee. It was too hot and too strong, but somehow exactly what she needed. What if we go through all of this and he still wins? What if 12 people listen to everything and decide I'm just a liar looking for attention? Then we'll deal with it. How? How do you deal with watching someone get away with murder? Caleb was quiet for a long time. I don't know. But I know that not trying is worse. At least this way you fought back. At least you didn't let him win without making him work for it. Lena looked at him, this complicated, damaged man who'd somehow become her anchor in all this chaos. When this is over, win or lose, I'm done fighting. I'm going to disappear somewhere quiet and spend the rest of my life trying to forget any of this happened. That sounds nice. You could come with me. Fresh start. No one knows us. No history. Caleb smiled slightly. Is that an offer? Maybe. I don't know. I'm too tired to know what I'm offering. Lena set down her coffee cup. I just know I don't want to do this alone anymore. And you're the only person who hasn't walked away. Not planning to start now. They sat there for a while longer, not talking, just existing in the quiet dark. And for the first time in months, Lena felt something almost like peace. It wouldn't last. She knew that. The trial was still ahead, along with months of testimony and cross-examination and media coverage. Victor's promises of destruction were real, and he had the resources to make good on them. But right now, in this moment, she had survived another day. And tomorrow, she'd survive another one. That would have to be enough. The 3 months between the preliminary hearing and the trial were the longest of Lena's life. Victor's legal team filed motion after motion, trying to delay, trying to get evidence thrown out, trying to force Lena to submit to psychiatric evaluation. Most of the motions were denied, but each one meant more court appearances, more lawyers' fees that Christine had to fight to get covered by the state, more opportunities for the media to rehash the same tired narratives about unstable wives and home-wrecking motel owners. The town split down the middle. Half the businesses on Main Street put up signs supporting Victor, innocent until proven guilty, and we stand with Hale. The other half quietly took them down after Margaret Chen organized a boycott. Families stopped speaking to each other. The Methodist Church had to cancel their annual potluck because people couldn't be in the same room without starting fights. Lena stopped going into town altogether. She'd order groceries for delivery, stay in room 12 or help Caleb with repairs around the motel, anything to avoid the stares and whispers. It felt like hiding again, but Christine insisted it was strategic. The defense wants you to crack, she'd said during one of their prep sessions. They want photos of you looking angry or unstable. Don't give them ammunition. So Lena stayed hidden and tried not to think about the fact that she'd traded one prison for another. The only bright spot was the support group that formed organically among the women who'd testified. Margaret started it, inviting Diana and Emma and a few others to meet at her dry cleaning shop after hours. At first it was just coffee and conversation, a chance to compare notes on the hate mail they were all receiving. But gradually it became something more, a place where they could be honest about how hard this was, how scared they were, how many times they'd almost given up. I got a call from Victor's lawyer yesterday, Diana said one evening in October. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of Margaret's back room, surrounded by racks of plastic-wrapped clothes, offering me $50,000 to recant my testimony. Emma's eyes went wide. 50,000? Yep. Said all I had to do was sign a statement saying I'd exaggerated what happened, that I was pressured by the prosecution to make it sound worse than it was. What did you say? Lena asked. Diana smiled grimly. I told him to go to hell, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted. 50,000 would change my life right now. It would also destroy Lena's case, Margaret pointed out. I know. That's why I said no. But the fact that I even considered it… Diana shook her head. What does that say about me? It says you're human, Lena said quietly. It says you have bills to pay and a life to rebuild. There's no shame in that. There's shame in selling out someone else's justice for money. But you didn't sell out. You thought about it, which is normal, and then you chose to do the right thing anyway. That's what counts. Emma pulled her knees to her chest. They came after me too. Not with money, with threats. Said if I testify, they'll make sure everyone knows about my daughter, that they'll drag her paternity through the courts, force DNA testing, give Victor parental rights. The room went silent. Can they do that? Margaret asked. I don't know. Christine says probably not, that Victor would have to admit he's the father first, which contradicts his whole defense. But the threat alone… Emma's voice cracked. I keep thinking about having to share custody with him, having to hand my daughter over every other weekend to a man who beat me so badly I almost lost her before she was born. Lena reached over and took Emma's hand. We won't let that happen. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise that if they try, we'll fight it together. All of us. Diana nodded. She's right. They want us isolated, picking us off one by one. That's how men like Victor win. But if we stick together… We're still just a bunch of women going up against a man with money and power, Emma interrupted. That's not a fair fight. It never is, Margaret said. But it's the fight we've got. They sat there in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lena spoke. You know what I realized the other day? Victor didn't just take 7 years of my life. He took my ability to trust my own judgment. Every decision I make now, I second-guess it. Is this what I really want? Or is this just what I've been conditioned to want? Am I being strong or am I being stubborn? Am I healing or am I just trading one form of damage for another? That's the worst part, Diana agreed. The way it gets into your head. I haven't seen Victor in 2 years, and I still hear his voice sometimes, telling me I'm worthless, that I'll never amount to anything, that no one will believe me. I hear Sarah's voice, Margaret said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Not Victor's. Sarah Patterson's. I didn't know her well, but I'd see her around town sometimes before she died, and I remember thinking she looked sad, tired, and I did nothing. Didn't say hi, didn't ask if she was okay. Just minded my own business like everyone else in this town. You couldn't have known, Lena said. Couldn't I? The signs were there, same signs I saw in Jennifer and Rachel, same signs everyone's been seeing in you for years. Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. We all knew. The whole damn town knew what Victor was. We just didn't want to deal with the mess of admitting it. That's not on you, isn't it? I had a chance to speak up when he assaulted me. Could have filed a police report, made it official, created a paper trail that might have helped the next woman. But I was scared. So I ran. And because I ran, you suffered. Emma suffered. Who knows how many others? You were a victim, Emma said firmly. You don't blame victims for not being heroes. But at what point do we stop being just victims and start being accomplices to our own silence? The question hung in the air, ugly and uncomfortable, because Margaret wasn't entirely wrong. How many times had Lena seen other women with bruises and said nothing? How many times had she heard whispers about someone's husband and changed the subject? Fear made sense. Survival made sense. But collective silence also enabled men like Victor to keep destroying lives. I don't have an answer to that, Lena said finally. I just know that we're not being silent now. That has to count for something. The trial started on a cold Monday in mid-November. Lena wore a navy blue dress that Christine had picked out. Conservative, respectful, the uniform of a woman who wanted to be taken seriously. She'd left her hair down to cover the scar on her left temple where Victor had once slammed her head against a cabinet. The courthouse in Tucson was bigger than the one in Redemption Flats, more imposing. They had to go through metal detectors and security checks. The hallways were packed with reporters, cameras, people Lena didn't recognize who'd apparently been following the case on the news. "Don't stop to talk to anyone," Christine instructed. "Head down, walk fast, stay between me and Caleb." They formed a protective barrier around her, pushing through the crowd. Someone shouted a question about whether she regretted destroying Victor's life. Someone else asked if she was sleeping with her lawyer too. Caleb's hand found the small of Lena's back, steadying her, keeping her moving forward. Inside the courtroom, it was standing room only. Victor's family had shown up, a sister from California, an elderly aunt, a cousin who looked uncomfortable being there. They sat behind the defense table, shooting daggers at Lena every time she glanced their way. Victor himself looked better than he had at the preliminary hearing. His lawyers had clearly been coaching him. He sat straight, looked attentive but not arrogant, projected an image of a man wrongly accused but confident in the justice system. When his eyes met Lena's, he smiled slightly. Then he mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." For the cameras, she realized. For the jury. Playing the remorseful husband trying to reconcile with his troubled wife. The jury selection had taken 2 days. Christine had fought hard to keep anyone with connections to Victor off the panel, but it was impossible to find 12 people in the county who hadn't at least heard of him. They ended up with 7 women and 5 men, ranging from a retired teacher to a young mechanic to a middle-aged nurse who'd seen her share of domestic violence cases in the ER. Judge Harrison entered, everyone stood, and the trial officially began. Mills delivered his opening statement first. He painted Victor as a self-made success story. Orphaned young, built a business from nothing, became a pillar of the community. A man who'd suffered terrible tragedy, losing 3 wives to accidents, only to be accused of murder by a 4th wife who'd fallen under the influence of another man. "The prosecution will show you documents," Mills said, pacing in front of the jury box. "They'll claim these documents prove Mr. Hale is some kind of master criminal. But what they really prove is that the police, desperate to close unsolved cases, have constructed a narrative that fits their evidence rather than following the evidence where it actually leads." He pointed at Lena. "They'll put Mrs. Whitmore on that stand and she'll tell you about abuse and fear and violence. And maybe some of what she says is true. Maybe there were arguments. Maybe things got heated sometimes. But marriages are complicated. People fight. That doesn't make every heated argument attempted murder." Christine's opening was more direct. "Victor Hale is a serial killer. Over the course of 9 years, he married 4 women under slightly different identities, systematically abused them, and when they tried to leave or became inconvenient, he killed them and collected their life insurance. 3 women are dead. A 4th survived only because she was brave enough to fight back." She walked the jury through the evidence, the forged marriage certificates, the insurance policies, the ledger documenting bribes. The defense will try to explain away each piece of evidence individually, but when you look at the pattern, when you see how methodically Mr. Hale planned and executed these crimes, there's only one conclusion. This man is exactly what the prosecution says he is. The first week of testimony was brutal. Christine called forensic accountants who walked through Victor's finances, showing how he'd profited from each wife's death. She called the medical examiner who'd autopsied Rachel Simmons, and now, with the benefit of hindsight and additional evidence, testified that the injuries were inconsistent with a simple car accident. She called the handwriting expert who confirmed that Victor had written the ledger documenting bribes and had forged Lena's signature on her life insurance policy. Mills cross-examined each witness aggressively, poking holes wherever he could find them, suggesting alternative explanations, creating doubt. The second week, Christine called the survivors. Margaret went first. She was nervous but held her ground, describing the assault in Victor's office in clear, unflinching detail. Mills tried to suggest she'd misinterpreted Victor's actions, that perhaps he'd been trying to move past her in a confined space, and she'd panicked. Margaret looked him dead in the eye and said, "I know the difference between someone brushing past me and someone threatening to kill me." Diana testified about the falsified documents and the break-in, her voice steady despite the defense's attempts to paint her as a disgruntled employee looking for revenge. Emma cried through most of her testimony, but she made it through, telling the jury about the pregnancy and the beating and 6 years of hiding. "Do you have any proof that Mr. Hale is your daughter's father?" Mills asked during cross-examination. "Yes, DNA test results. Christine had them run 3 weeks ago." You could hear the air leave Mills's lungs. He hadn't expected that. Victor's face went carefully blank, but Lena saw his hands clench under the table. "No further questions," Mills said tightly. Then it was Lena's turn. She'd been dreading this for months. All the preparation sessions with Christine, all the practice questions and mock cross-examinations, none of it had prepared her for the reality of sitting in that witness box with a courtroom full of people staring at her. Christine started gently, walking her through her relationship with Victor, how they'd met, the early days when he'd been charming, the slow erosion of that charm into control and then violence. "Can you describe the first time he hit you?" Lena took a breath. She'd told this story so many times, it almost didn't feel real anymore. "We'd been married about 6 months. I disagreed with him about something small, what movie to watch, and he backhanded me hard enough that I fell." "What did you do?" "I got up, apologized, told myself it was my fault for pushing him." "Did he apologize?" "Yes. He cried. Said he'd never do it again." "But he did." 2 weeks later. And then it just kept happening. Once a week, twice a week, sometimes every day. Christine had her walk through 7 years of abuse in careful detail. The broken bones, the hospitalizations explained away as accidents, the isolation from friends and family, the financial control. All of it documented with medical records, photographs, testimony from the ER doctors who'd treated her. Then she got to the night Victor had confessed. "He told you about the previous wives?" "Yes." "He was drunk. He told me about Sarah falling down the stairs, Jennifer falling while hiking, Rachel's brakes being cut. He laughed about it, said everyone believed him every time." "What did you do after he told you this?" "I waited until he passed out, then I left. Went to the Dusty Rose and stayed in the room Caleb had offered me." "Were you afraid?" "Terrified." "Of what?" "That I'd be next. That if I went back, he'd kill me just like he killed the others." Mills's cross-examination was everything Lena had feared. He questioned her timeline, suggested she was misremembering dates, implied that her abuse was really just normal marital conflict blown out of proportion. "Mrs. Whitmore, you claim to have been terrified of your husband for 7 years, yet you had multiple opportunities to leave. You had a job, you had a car, you had access to a phone. Why didn't you call the police?" "Because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Because Victor was friends with the sheriff. Because I had nowhere to go and no money." "You had money from your job at the diner." "Minimum wage. Not enough to rent an apartment or not enough to rent an apartment in Redemption Flats, perhaps, but enough to buy a bus ticket to another city. Enough to call a domestic violence hotline. Enough to do something other than stay with a man you claim was trying to kill you." Mills leaned against the witness box. "Unless the truth is that you weren't actually afraid, that you enjoyed the lifestyle Mr. Hale provided and were willing to endure some rough patches to keep it. That's not, you lived in a beautiful home, drove a nice car, wore expensive clothes. Those don't sound like the circumstances of a woman being held prisoner." Lena's hands clenched. "You can't buy your way out of terror with a nice car." "No, but you can choose to leave, and you chose to stay, for 7 years, until you met Mr. Rourke." "Caleb had nothing to do with—" "Didn't he? Isn't it true that you began spending significant time with Mr. Rourke in the months before you left your husband?" "I worked at his diner. Of course I spent time, alone time, private conversations. He gave you a key to a private room. That sounds like more than an employer-employee relationship." "He was helping me. Or he was a man interested in a married woman, and you were a woman looking for a way out of your marriage. And these accusations against Mr. Hale are just your way of justifying the affair." "I didn't have an affair." "Then why did you go straight to Mr. Rourke's motel when you left? Why not a women's shelter? Why not a hotel in another city? Why specifically to a room that Mr. Rourke had prepared for you?" Lena's throat was tight. "Because he was the only person who offered to help. Or because he was the person you wanted to be with." Christine objected, but the damage was done. Lena could see it on some of the jurors' faces, the doubt creeping in. Maybe she was lying. Maybe this was all about an affair gone wrong. By the time she left the stand 3 hours later, Lena felt like she'd been beaten all over again. Different kind of beating, but it hurt just as much. The third week, the defense presented their case. They called Victor's business associates, who testified about his generosity and community involvement. They called character witnesses who described him as kind, thoughtful, devastated by the deaths of his previous wives. They even called a psychiatrist who testified that Lena showed signs of borderline personality disorder and might be prone to fabricating abuse narratives. Christine tore into each witness on cross-examination, but Mills had chosen them carefully. They were believable, sympathetic. By the end of the week, the jury looked confused rather than convinced. Then Mills called Victor to the stand. He was perfect, calm, composed, radiating wounded dignity. He admitted that their marriage had problems, that they'd fought sometimes, that maybe he'd raised his voice or slammed a door but never raised a hand to his wife in violence. "I loved Lena," he said, looking directly at the jury. "I still love her, and it breaks my heart that she's been convinced by Mr. Rourke to destroy our marriage with these lies." "What about the previous wives?" Christine asked during cross-examination. "Sarah, Jennifer, Rachel, 3 women, 3 accidents, all within 5 years." "3 tragedies," Victor corrected gently. "I've been unlucky in love, but that doesn't make me a murderer." "What about the ledger? Your handwriting documenting bribes to public officials, business expenses, legal consulting fees. The prosecution is twisting legitimate business transactions into something sinister. And the life insurance policy on Lena that she never signed." "She did sign it. We discussed it together. Maybe she doesn't remember, but I assure you she consented." He had an answer for everything. Christine pushed harder, trying to crack his composure, but Victor never slipped. He played the part of the wronged husband perfectly. The closing arguments took an entire day. Mills painted Victor as a victim of vindictive prosecution and an unfaithful wife. Christine laid out the evidence piece by piece, showing the pattern, the planning, the cold calculation behind 3 murders and 1 attempted murder. "Look at the facts," she told the jury. "Not the stories, not the character witnesses, the facts. 4 marriages under false identities, 3 dead wives, 1 ledger documenting bribes, 1 forged life insurance policy, 1 pre-written obituary. These are not coincidences. This is a pattern, and the only person who benefited from that pattern is sitting right there." She pointed at Victor. "Don't let him get away with it again." The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of Lena pacing room 12, unable to eat, barely sleeping. 4 days of Christine calling every few hours with updates that weren't really updates. Still deliberating, no verdict yet. Hang in there. 4 days of wondering if she'd put herself through all of this for nothing. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Christine called. "They have a verdict. Get to the courthouse." Lena's hands were shaking so badly Caleb had to drive. They made it to Tucson in record time, rushing into the courtroom just as the jury was filing back in. Lena tried to read their faces, but they were carefully neutral. That could mean anything, or nothing. Judge Harrison asked the standard questions. Had they reached a verdict? They had. On all counts? Yes, Your Honor. Will the defendant please rise? Victor stood, his lawyer beside him. For the first time since the trial started, Lena saw genuine fear flash across his face. The jury foreman, the retired teacher, stood and read from a piece of paper. On the count of murder in the first degree of Sarah Patterson, we find the defendant guilty. Lena's knees went weak. Caleb's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. On the count of murder in the first degree of Jennifer Yates, we find the defendant guilty. Victor's sister started crying. On the count of murder in the first degree of Rachel Simmons, we find the defendant guilty. Victor's face had gone completely white. On the count of attempted murder of Lena Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Victor's family sobbing, reporters rushing for the doors, people shouting questions. Through it all, Lena just sat there, staring at Victor as the bailiffs moved to handcuff him. He looked at her one last time. No smile now, no charm, just rage. Pure, undiluted rage. "This isn't over," he mouthed. But it was. It really was. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Harrison was not inclined toward mercy. "Mr. Hale, you have been convicted of 3 counts of murder in the first degree and 1 count of attempted murder." The evidence showed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. You systematically targeted vulnerable women, abused them, and when they became inconvenient, you murdered them for financial gain. You corrupted public officials to cover your crimes. You showed no remorse, no conscience, no humanity. Harrison paused, looking down at Victor with something like disgust. For the murder of Sarah Patterson, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Jennifer Yates, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Rachel Simmons, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences are to be served consecutively. Victor's lawyer tried to object, but Harrison silenced him with a look. For the attempted murder of Lena Whitmore, you are sentenced to an additional 25 years. And Mr. Hale? Harrison leaned forward. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life thinking about the women you destroyed, because they're not coming back, and neither are you. The bailiffs led Victor away. He didn't look at Lena, didn't look at anyone, just stared straight ahead as they took him out of the courtroom and out of her life forever. 3 life sentences plus 25 years. He'd die in prison. There was no coming back from that. Lena walked out of the courthouse into the bright December sunlight and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. The months after the trial were strange. Lena kept expecting Victor to appear, to find some loophole to buy his way out of prison the way he'd bought his way out of everything else. But he didn't. Couldn't. The appeals process would take years, and his lawyers privately told the press that the conviction was solid. Barring a miracle, Victor Hale would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Redemption Flat slowly began to heal, though the scars ran deep. Sheriff Dawes was convicted of accepting bribes and served 18 months. Mayor Drummond resigned in disgrace. The county coroner lost his medical license. New people stepped into the vacuum. Better people, mostly. Ones who hadn't been on Victor's payroll. Lena stayed at the Dusty Rose through the winter. She wasn't ready to leave yet. Wasn't ready to figure out what came next. She helped Caleb run the motel, worked the morning shift at the diner, spent her evenings with Margaret and Diana and Emma, all of them figuring out how to be survivors instead of victims. It wasn't easy. Lena still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden movements, still caught herself planning escape routes in every room she entered. 7 years of conditioning didn't disappear just because the threat was gone. But slowly, gradually, she started to remember who she'd been before Victor. Started to rebuild the pieces of herself that he'd systematically destroyed. She took up painting, something she'd loved in college but abandoned when Victor said it was a waste of time. She started calling her mother again, though those conversations were stiff and uncomfortable. Some relationships, once broken, didn't fully heal, but they could at least stop actively bleeding, and she started spending more time with Caleb. Not romantically. Not at first. They were both too damaged for that, too aware of how easy it would be to fall into old patterns. But they'd sit on the porch of room 12 in the evenings, drinking coffee and watching the desert sunset, talking about everything and nothing. What are you going to do? Caleb asked one night in early March. Long term, I mean. You can stay here as long as you want, but this can't be the rest of your life. Why not? Because you're 34 years old and you have a whole life ahead of you. Hiding out in a motel room isn't living. It's not hiding, it's recovering. Fair enough, but at some point recovery becomes stagnation. Lena was quiet for a while. I've been thinking about going back to school. I had 2 years of college before I met Victor. Maybe finish my degree. What were you studying? Social work. She laughed. Ironic, right? I wanted to help people, and I couldn't even help myself. That's not ironic. That's just how life works sometimes. We're better at fixing other people's problems than our own. What about you? You going to run this motel forever? Caleb shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. I've been thinking about selling it. Moving somewhere else. Somewhere without so many ghosts. Where would you go? Don't know yet. Somewhere with mountains, clean air, not much heat. He glanced at her. You could come, if you wanted. Is that an invitation? It's an option. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who survived some bad things trying to build something better. Lena thought about it. About leaving Redemption Flats and all its memories behind. About starting over somewhere new with someone who understood what she'd been through because he had his own scars. I'll think about it, she said. And she did. For weeks, she turned the idea over in her mind. Leaving felt like running, but staying felt like being stuck in the past. In April, she drove to the women's prison in Goodyear, where Sarah Patterson's sister lived. Christine had connected them, and they'd been exchanging letters for months. Sarah's sister Linda was serving 5 years for drug charges. She'd missed her own sister's funeral because she'd been locked up. They met in the visitation room, two women who'd never known each other but were connected by Victor's violence. "I should have been there," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have protected her." "You couldn't have known," Lena said, the same words people had said to her so many times. "None of us could." "But I knew she was unhappy. She'd write me letters sometimes, and I could read between the lines. But I was in here, and I couldn't do anything, and I just—" Linda's voice broke. "I'm so glad you stopped him, that he can't hurt anyone else." "Me too." They talked for over an hour, sharing stories about Sarah, about survival, about guilt and grief, and the impossible weight of what-ifs. When visiting hours ended, Linda hugged Lena hard. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being brave enough to fight when Sarah couldn't." Driving back to Redemption Flats, Lena thought about bravery. She'd never felt brave. Terrified, desperate, angry, all of those. But brave? Maybe bravery wasn't about not being scared. Maybe it was about being scared and doing the thing anyway. Getting on that witness stand even when she wanted to run. Letting those women form their support group even when it meant admitting she couldn't do this alone. Choosing to heal instead of letting Victor's damage define her forever. That night, she knocked on Caleb's door. "I've made a decision," she said when he opened it. "Yeah? I want to finish my degree. I want to become a social worker, help other women who are going through what I went through." "That's good. That's really good. But I don't want to do it here. Too many memories. Too many people who still think I destroyed Victor's life instead of saving my own." Caleb nodded slowly. "Where are you thinking?" "Colorado, maybe. Somewhere with mountains, clean air, not much heat." He smiled, that rare expression that made him look years younger. "That an invitation?" "It's an option. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who survived some bad things trying to build something better." Caleb's smile widened. "I think I've heard that line before." "Yeah, well, it was a good line." They sold the Dusty Rose in May to a young couple from Phoenix who wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Lena helped pack up room 12, surprised by how little she actually owned. 7 years with Victor, and almost nothing to show for it except scars. The support group threw her a going-away party at Margaret's shop. All the women were there, plus a few others who'd come forward after the trial, inspired by Lena's courage to speak up about their own abusive situations. "You started something," Margaret said, raising a glass of cheap champagne. "A movement, almost. Women in this town aren't staying quiet anymore." "Good," Lena said. "That's how it should be." Emma's daughter, who'd just turned 7, gave Lena a drawing she'd made, a stick figure woman with a cape flying over a city. "You're a superhero," she said solemnly. Lena knelt down to her level. "I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. I'm just a person who got tired of being afraid." "That's what makes you a superhero," the little girl insisted. Maybe she was right. Maybe surviving was its own kind of superpower. They left Redemption Flats on a Sunday morning in early June, Caleb's truck loaded with everything they owned and a U-Haul trailer rattling behind them. Lena watched the town disappear in the rearview mirror and felt nothing. No sadness. No regret. Just a strange sense of finality. That part of her life was over. They drove north, taking their time, stopping at roadside diners and cheap motels. By the time they reached Colorado, Lena felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in years. They found a small town in the mountains, population 3,000, where nobody knew them and nobody cared about their past. Caleb bought a rundown motel that needed work. Lena enrolled in the state university's online program to finish her degree. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. Lena still had bad days where the trauma felt fresh and overwhelming. Caleb still woke up from nightmares about the woman from his cavalry days who he hadn't saved. They were both damaged in ways that would probably never fully heal. But they were healing, slowly, together. One evening in September, sitting on the porch of their new motel while the sun set behind snow-capped peaks, Caleb asked, "Do you regret it? Going through all that? The trial, the media, all of it?" Lena thought about it. About the price she'd paid to see Victor convicted, the relationships destroyed, the reputation shredded, the months of hell. "No," she said finally. "I regret the 7 years I lost. I regret not leaving sooner, but fighting back, testifying, making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else, I don't regret that at all. Even though it cost you everything? It didn't cost me everything. It cost me the things that were already poisoned. My marriage was never real. Those friendships were conditional. My mother's love came with strings attached. She looked at Caleb. What I gained was worth more. My freedom, my voice, the knowledge that I'm stronger than I thought I was. You are, Caleb said quietly. Stronger than you know. Lena leaned against him and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It was comfortable, safe. Nothing like the fear-soaked years with Victor. I've been thinking, she said. When I finish my degree, I want to work with domestic violence survivors. Help them navigate the legal system, find resources, rebuild their lives. You'd be good at that. I know what it's like to be trapped, to think there's no way out, to believe the person hurting you when they say nobody will believe you. Lena's voice was steady. If I can help even one woman see that leaving is possible, that fighting back is possible, then everything I went through will have meant something. She thought about Sarah and Jennifer and Rachel, about all the women who hadn't made it out, about Emma's daughter growing up free because her mother had been brave enough to run, about Margaret finding her voice after years of silence. Victor had tried to destroy her, had systematically broken her down, erased her identity, planned her death. And he'd almost succeeded. But he hadn't. She was still here, still breathing, still fighting. And that, Lena realized, was the greatest victory of all. Not defeating Victor Hale, though that mattered. Not seeing him convicted, though that brought justice. The real victory was simpler and more profound. She'd learned that her worth was not something anyone else could grant or take away. Not a husband, not a judge, not a jury, not the court of public opinion. Her worth was inherent, unshakable, hers alone to define. And nobody, not Victor, not anyone, could ever take that from her again. As the last light faded from the Colorado sky and stars began appearing overhead, Lena closed her eyes and felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the absence of pain, not the erasure of scars, just a quiet, steady certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Free, healing, whole. And finally, after 7 years of surviving, she was learning how to live.